People at work call me the Ninja Nurse. I didn't hate the nickname at first. There's something almost dignified about it. Ninjas are disciplined and precise. They're quick and they move without being seen. If you're going to be called something behind your back, you could do worse. But I know why they call me that. And it isn't a compliment. Not really. I wear a scarf that covers the perimeter of my head and neck completely. Over that is a face mask, the kind that leaves only the eyes exposed. And over that, a pair of large, dark sunglasses. It ensures that even my eyes aren't visible to anyone I pass in the corridor. Some of the older staff members nod approvingly. They see me a devout woman who prioritizes modesty. The other staff, the ones who know me long enough, don't nod approvingly. They remembered what I looked like 6 months ago. A full makeup to every shift. Foundation, eyeliner, the works. Hair done properly, not just pulled back and hidden. Brows plucked to something I considered perfection. And I wasn't shy to show it off. I had just under 15,000 followers on Instagram. I did post pictures somewhat regularly. Nothing scandalous though. Just a person who liked the way she looked and wasn't shy about it. A person who turned toward cameras, not away from them. In their defense, my transformation happened almost overnight, with no warning or explanation. I haven't shown my face to another human being since. My friends at work have been kind about it. They support me, or they try to, but even they get uncomfortable around my one absolute rule. I never take photographs. Not group shots in the break room, not candid snaps, not the kind of harmless phone photo you take without really thinking. I see the camera come out and I am already moving, already raising a hand to cover what is already covered. They find it strange, and I don't blame them. I am writing this because I need someone to understand. I can't say it out loud. Not to them, not for their sake and mine. The least I can do is tell the truth somewhere, even if that somewhere is on the internet. I've been a night shift ER nurse at ANA Nightingale Hospital for 7 years. ANA stands for Aldermore and Associates, a multinational corporate consultancy firm. They fund the hospital as part of their corporate social responsibility. The Nightingale part refers to Florence Nightingale, the legendary nurse herself. The administration invokes her image constantly. It is plastered on the walls, referenced in orientation, and woven into every conversation. It is written in guidelines regarding workload and duty, and what it truly means to serve. I used to find it inspiring. I understand now that it was a management technique. You don't complain about extra duties when the ghost of Florence Nightingale is watching you from a framed poster by the door. The hospital charges its patients nothing. Not a single penny, regardless of treatment required. It sustains itself entirely on Aldermore's funding and external donations. As expected, it attracts the poorest and most desperate people in the city. People who have nowhere else to go and nothing to offer, apart from their suffering and their gratitude. It is genuinely a good place to work. The pay is better than any other hospital in the city. The sense of purpose is real. I believed in it for a long time. The night shift has the lowest admissions and the highest deaths. You get used to that arithmetic. You also get used to the other studies that the hospital assigns you with. Yes, there are a number of other studies that come with the job. Duties that nurses usually aren't supposed to do. One of those Florence Nightingale extras that no one agreed to, but everyone performs without question. I won't give you the full list, but I'll tell you about the one that matters. When an unclaimed patient dies, the ER nurses go through their belongings. It is done to establish identity and contact known relatives, It sounds compassionate. In theory, it actually is. In practice, it means going through the pockets of strangers who died alone at 5 in the morning. It means looking for a phone, an ID card, or a scrap of paper with a name on it. We've run out of placeholder names for those who remain unidentified. You know, John Doe and Jane Doe, we exhausted those long ago. The nurses have started using creative names instead, like the man who was found carrying a book on judo. The ER nurse named him Joe Doe and judo, juvenile humor. The patient died at midnight. The joke lived on for a week. I don't find it funny, but I understand it. The work gets overwhelming, so people cope however they can. 7 years has taught me to not judge the coping. It was on one of those ordinary nights that the first patient arrived. 2 young men carried him in. He was a man in his mid-40s, clearly malnourished. Bald head, long white beard, a torn jacket over a pair of dirty white trousers. His symptoms were unlike anything I'd seen before. His chest had a bluish discoloration, spreading from the sternum outward. His eyes were bloodshot, but the hue was wrong. It wasn't a red, but a deep, unsettling blue, like ink dropped into water. He was foaming at the mouth. His fingers were curled inward, all of them, both hands. When I tried to gently straighten them, they refused to move. Not from rigor, not from resistance, just completely, impossibly fixed. He was gasping for air with his whole chest and throat working, but producing no sound whatsoever. And every 30 seconds or so, his entire body jolted. It was neither a seizure nor a tremor, but a violent jerking movement that lasted 2 or 3 seconds before it released. I'd never seen this combination before, not once. I followed protocol and initiated symptomatic management, and within 30 minutes, Dr. Cyrus Mola appeared. I considered myself lucky. Dr. Mola is our chief physician. He operates on a schedule, morning rounds and evening rounds. That is generally where his presence in the ER begins and ends. But that night, he happened to be in the vicinity, he said, and thought he would look in. He stood at the foot of the bed with his small writing pad, completely still, completely composed. He directed us with a quiet sense of authority. I had always admired that about him, the way nothing ever seemed to rattle him. The patient died in just under 2 hours. Dr. Mola graciously offered to prepare the death certificate himself, a task that normally falls to the junior doctors on duty. I observed him as he wrote down, "Cause of death, cardiorespiratory failure due to idiopathic cyanotic heart disease." I told him the symptoms seemed unusual. The presentation had been unlike anything in my experience. He took his time to explain it to me. Cyanosis is a lack of oxygen in the blood, which accounts for the blue discoloration. The associated symptoms are the body's response to prolonged oxygen deprivation, and poor nutrition combined with years of inadequate hygiene can produce presentations that look dramatic on the surface. The findings may look peculiar, he said, but they make complete sense. That is, once you know what you're looking at. He was so knowledgeable, I thought, so composed. I thanked him and went back to work. The 2 men who had brought the patient knew nothing about him. They had simply found him collapsed and done the decent thing. No ID in his belongings, no phone. I was about to close the jacket when I noticed something in the inside pocket. A crumpled Polaroid. I unfolded it. It was a photograph of me. I was in my bathroom brushing my hair. The photograph had been taken through the window. I could see the edge of the frame, the angle of the glass. I was completely unaware of the camera. I was just standing there in my bathroom, at what looked like early morning, brushing my hair. I turned it over. Scrawled on the back in handwriting that looked hurried and slightly uneven. "Looks different in real and real. How come?" need answers. My hands were shaking before I realized they were shaking. I looked up at the corridor. Patients, colleagues, the gurney being wheeled toward the morgue. All of it completely normal. All of it completely indifferent to the fact that I was standing there, holding a photograph of myself, taken through a window I'd never once thought about covering. I pocketed it. I told no one. I finished my shift. I went home and sat on my bed with every light in the apartment blazing. I read those 2 lines over and over until my eyes burned. Not a threat. Not even an acknowledgement that I existed as a person, one with feelings and a life and a right to privacy. Just a question, like I was a problem to be solved. That was somehow the worst part. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I go to the police? I live in a country where policing is, to put it kindly, a joke. A joke with a long history of punching down, of harassing the very people who come forward, of making the process of reporting a crime feel more shady than committing a crime itself. And even on my best day, what evidence do I have? A crumpled Polaroid found in a dead man's pocket. A note on the back. No suspect, no name, no face. I also know what else you're thinking. Install cameras, set up a security system, move apartments. I want you to understand my reality before you finish that thought. I am well paid for my position, better than any other nurse in the city, and I am not ungrateful for that. But I have a brother in college. I have a mother undergoing cancer treatment. I have a father who is quadriplegic and requires a full-time paid caregiver. All 3 of them are entirely dependent on me. Every penny of what I earn above basic survival goes toward keeping those 3 people alive and functional. So I couldn't afford a security system, and I couldn't afford to move. The best I could do was check every lock, every window latch, every corner of every cabinet over and over, and try to catch a few hours of rest at the hospital, because paranoia had made sleeping at home something close to impossible. 2 nights later, there was another patient. It was a woman appearing around 50, clearly homeless. A restaurant waiter had found her collapsed on the pavement on his way home. Same symptoms, identical in every detail. The blue chest, the blue eyes, the foam, the locked fingers, the silent gasping, the jolting. Dr. Mola appeared. He'd been in the building for another patient, he mentioned, and thought he would look in on this one too. I watched him more carefully this time. I saw him click off the stopwatch on his smartwatch when the monitors flatlined. The patient had been with us for 1 hour and 53 minutes. Same cause of death on the certificate. Same wording. He offered to prepare it himself again. I went through the woman's belongings. Tucked into the folds of her clothing was a crumpled Polaroid. This one was taken inside my apartment. I was in my kitchen, facing away from the camera. On the back, in the same handwriting. The nose is the first one to catch attention. The nose looks smart. That nose knows stuff. Nose knows? Nose knows. Ha 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 ha. I found the waiter who had brought her in. He was a young kid, clearly shaken. Clearly there because he thought it was the right thing to do. I looked at him carefully for a long moment. He knew nothing. You could tell just by looking at him. I said nothing to anyone. The pattern repeated every 2 to 3 days. Same symptoms, same 2-hour window, same death, same certificate. Dr. Mola had stopped making excuses for his timing. I overheard him telling a junior doctor about a recent surge in cyanotic heart disease cases in the city, something he intended to research properly. He suggested that the nurses could serve as data collectors, possibly even co-investigators in the study. He glanced at me as he said it. His gaze used to give me confidence. Now, it made my skin crawl. in a way I couldn't articulate. I tried to delegate the identity checking to another nurse, but that wasn't possible. I was the senior nurse on the block. Everyone else was already past capacity. It came back to me every time. The third Polaroid showed me checking my front door. It was taken from outside, through the gap under the door or through the letterbox. I still don't know which. I was checking the lock for what must have been the fifth time that afternoon. On the back, it said, "Have you seen how a man dies for the sake of your pretty eyes? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do." The fourth one was taken from across the street while I waited for the hospital bus in the early evening. I was standing on the pavement in daylight, surrounded by people. My stalker was across the street, holding a camera, and I had no idea. The note on that one read simply, "Lips, lips, lips," repeated 14 times. I counted. By the time the fifth patient died, I had been living in the hospital for 2 days, sleeping in the nurse's room, eating in the cafeteria, never leaving the building. My colleagues didn't ask. They were too buried in their own work to question it. I think they assumed I was pulling extra shifts for the money. I let them think that. The fifth Polaroid was taken in the ER. I was dozing in my chair between patients, head tipped back slightly, completely unaware. The back of this one said, "That face. Want to keep seeing that face. Will do anything for it. Anything, anything, anything." He had been standing a few feet away from me while I slept, in the building I had retreated to because I thought it was safe. He stood there in the middle of a working hospital, photographed me sleeping, and walked out without anyone noticing a thing. That was the one that broke me. I caught Dr. Mola as he was leaving the ER that night. I started to explain. He didn't let me finish. Such matters were outside his jurisdiction, he said. He recommended I contact the hospital's Code of Conduct hotline. He gave me the number and walked away. I called it from the nurse's room at 2:30 in the morning. A man answered. His voice was warm, measured, and professionally calm, the kind of voice that is specifically trained to make people feel heard. I don't remember everything I said. I know the call lasted 16 minutes because I checked afterward. I know most of it was me talking, barely coherent. I know that my tone probably wasn't professional, and I know that I was getting everything out in whatever order it came. He didn't interrupt me. He didn't redirect me. He just listened. When I finally ran out of words, he said, "HR block, top floor. I'll be there in an hour." It was 3 in the morning. I went there anyway. The HR block was empty, dark corridors, locked offices, the particular silence of a building that isn't meant to be occupied at this hour, except for one light at the far end of the corridor and a voice I recognized from the phone telling me to come in. The man introduced himself as Rafiq. He wore a pale shirt with the sleeves rolled exactly twice. He looked barely 30, but he carried himself with the settled authority of someone who knows this place. His staff pass looked different than mine. It identified him as an Eldermore employee, not a hospital one. He told me to take a seat. He asked to see the Polaroids. He examined them for 5 full minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. "So the patients who carry these Polaroids, they all present similarly, you say?" "Not similarly. Identically. Symptoms unlike anything I've seen in 7 years. The bluish chest, the blue eyes, and the fingers. Fingers curled inward, foaming at the mouth, gasping without sound, full body convulsions at irregular intervals." I stopped. "Yes, exactly. But how did you—" "You didn't finish your thought, young lady. Was there something else you wanted to tell me?" Something else about these patients? I steadied myself. Well, the gender varies. We've had 3 men and 2 women so far. All of them appear to be aged between 40 and 50. All of them coming from the slum, the one in the northern part of the city. The room felt very still. Yes, I said, but I never told you. Rafiq stood up. You've had a long night. Get some sleep. Your problem will be taken care of. You have my word. He smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile. He then walked out of the cabin at a pace that suggested he had somewhere more important to be. I sat there for a long time after he left. Something kept bothering me. Not that he knew the symptoms before I described them. Not that he knew the demographics before I mentioned them. But the fact that he knew where the patients were coming from. I never gave him that. I just couldn't do it even if I wanted to. Because I never had that information. In fact, no one in the hospital has had that information, as far as I know. Looking back, I didn't know a lot of things. The month that followed was genuinely a breath of fresh air. No more Polaroids. The patients with the strange symptoms kept arriving, but less frequently. We only had 3 in 30 days that followed. Dr. Mola quietly ensured they were routed to a different block, one I was not responsible for. From a distance, I could still see him, standing at the bedside with his writing pad and his stopwatch. But he no longer looked at me while he did it. I started sleeping at home again. I started feeling like myself again, or something close to it. I wish that was the end of the story. Instead, it leads to the part that I can't share with people around me. It was the season of Eid. The hospital had given most of the staff an extended holiday, retaining only a skeleton crew for essential services. My roster fell on the second night. It was just me and a duty doctor who had been yawning since the moment he arrived. My block was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely quiet. A few patients were in their beds, none in critical condition, the kind of night that feels like the hospital is exhaling. The doctor excused himself for a coffee break sometime after midnight. He soon disappeared through the double doors. I was considering a coffee break myself. The quiet was making me drowsy. That's when the ER door slammed open. Something barely resembling a human stepped inside. It was a man, or at least it used to be one. He was bare from the waist up. His jeans were covered in dried blood, brown and stiff, not fresh. He was drooling from the corner of his mouth. His chest was indrawing sharply with every breath, the effort of it visible across the whole ribcage. He was making a sound in his throat. Not a groan, not a word, but something more animal than either. His eyes were bloodshot, but the color wasn't red. It was green, a deep, flat, impossible green. His chest had a large, irregular patch of the same color, spreading from the sternum. Beneath the skin, I could see the outline of vessels, dark green and prominent, tracing a path toward a pulsating area at the center of his chest. I could see the outline of his heart through the surface of his skin. It was still beating, and everything surrounding it was the wrong color. His fingers curled and uncurled randomly with every step. His limbs were twitching, like a signal firing without a target. He staggered towards me. Every step looked like the last one he would manage, looking like he was about to fall. But he never fell. And through all of it, through the drool and the growling and the green, he was trying to smile at me. Real and real, he said. Different indeed. Wanted answers. I just wanted some fucking answers. I screamed. I don't remember deciding to. It just came out of me, sharp and involuntary. I was already on my feet, already stepping backward. He stopped. Is that fear? He said. Or is that care? My right hand picked up a scalpel from the nearest mayo stand. I braced myself with the only weapon I could find. He placed his hand on his chest, over the pulsating outline. "Don't worry, this one's different. Takes its time. Like a body decomposing while the mind is alive." He laughed. It was sudden, genuine, and hysterical. What a joke. My back had found the corner of the room before my mind realized it. I had nowhere to go. I clenched the scalpel as tightly as I could. "The eyes," he said quietly. "The ears, the nose, the lips." Then he vomited. A pool of dark red blood hit the floor and spread. He looked down at it, chuckled, and raised his eyes to mine. Blood still running from the corner of his mouth, green eyes fixed entirely on me. "The face." He ran at me, not staggering, but running, frantic and lurching, twisted fingers reaching forward, green eyes wide, entirely focused on me. I pressed myself into the corner and screamed with everything I had. His body hit me with its full weight. I noticed it was less weight than I expected, and getting lighter. He slid against me and dropped down slowly, barely conscious, barely holding his eyes open. His breathing had changed. It was shallower, getting further apart. The weight made me crumble to my knees. He grabbed my elbow with his right hand, but the grip was much feebler than I expected. His body jolted for a couple of seconds. He looked up at me, at my face to be exact. Just looked, for a long moment, with something in his expression. Something that I cannot name and do not want to. He gasped. "Finish it, please." In one movement, I drove the scalpel into the pulsating outline of his heart. I don't know what came over me, and I don't know where it came from. His eyes closed. A single tear ran down the side of his face. He was smiling. I only remember fragments of what came after. Staff flooding the block, voices that I recognized, Dr. Mola arriving within minutes, as though he'd been waiting nearby, someone putting a hand on my shoulder, the floor tilting slightly. And then as my vision began to narrow and darken at the edges, I saw Rafiq standing at the far end of the ER. Then there was nothing. The official account read something like this. A potentially schizophrenic patient, also suffering from cyanotic heart disease, arrived at the ER in a state of acute delirium. He attacked the duty nurse without provocation. The nurse defended herself. The patient died despite the hospital's best efforts. An external police investigation confirmed it. The security guard had been asleep on the job and was terminated. The duty doctor had stepped out for a coffee break and was therefore not present. The ER security cameras experienced a technical malfunction beginning approximately 4 minutes before the patient's arrival. It was an open and shut case, which was closed in a week. I read through the clinical notes. There was no mention of green discoloration anywhere in the documentation. Description of the deceased read like a textbook presentation of cyanotic heart disease, possibly undiagnosed psychiatric condition, typed in bold. It also said that a small amount of blood was vomited following the stab wound. The cause of death, signed by Dr. Cyrus Mola, was precisely what you would expect it to be. A certain Mr. Rafiq had signed the document as an unbiased witness to the events. There were patients in other blocks of the ER that night, the ones resting in their beds and the ones who had been awake, the ones who had seen the green and had rushed to me after the attack. But I couldn't find a single one of them. Never again. They were poor people, possibly homeless, unregistered and untraceable, gone with the wind as people from that part of the city tend to be. There were 2 nurses who had been staffing the adjacent blocks that night. I was told that they resigned within the week, citing unsafe working conditions. I tried calling them several times. Their phone numbers are no longer in service. I was given 30 days of paid leave, full salary, no questions asked. Not once in those 30 days did anyone contact me to take a statement. The hospital took care of it, I was told. That is why I cover my face. And that is why I don't take photographs. I have theories about all of it. About what was really happening in that hospital. About what the patients were dying from. About what Eldermore is actually using that building for. About what Rafiq's role in all of it truly is. I would like to discuss those theories with someone. I really do. Been carrying them alone for 6 months. And trust me, they are getting heavy. But I really have to go now. My shift starts soon, and the workload hasn't gotten better. If anything, it has been increasing steadily over the past few weeks, ever since the epidemic of cyanotic heart disease has returned to the city. But this time, the patients are no longer presenting with blue discoloration. They are presenting with pitch black, and they are no longer taking 2 hours to die. The current average is 22.5 minutes. I know the exact figure, thanks to Dr. Mola. He still times every single one of them, right in front of me. He stopped hiding it a long time ago.
Something peculiar is happening in a major city in England, and I'm quite sure that I'm being blocked from making it public. I'm Haley Bennett, a relatively successful freelance journalist, and I moved to this city a couple years back. I cover any local story that takes my interest. When my dad was still alive, he was successful in the industry, so I have firm connections to multiple publications that regularly publish my reports, articles, and interviews. Some are national, some local. In this industry, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And my dad gave me a great entrance into a journalistic freedom that not many get to experience. So I was extremely shocked when I was turned down by 5 of my go-to editors when I pitched them the article I am about to share with you. Because something that is this out of the ordinary happening in the home of Europe's top colleges is newsworthy. It's rare that my pitches are turned down, but when they are, I am always given excellent feedback about why. This time, I have just been told no. There has been no explanation, no advice, no spec to work towards. Something is going on. I'm sure of it. Maybe I'm a bit paranoid, but I have decided to put the article out myself while I continue my investigation. I don't feel comfortable being the only one pushing for this to go public. In my 12 years in this profession, I have learned to trust my instinct. And something feels off here. This seems the safest platform for it, at least while I gather more evidence. I am having to keep the name of the city secret for legal reasons. I hope that those of you who read this will get the same uneasy feeling that I have from everything that's happened so far. Editor to include headline. An unexpected influx of mathematicians and scientists has left the residents of city redacted, baffled, after access to the city was temporarily restricted to allow for a mysterious mass arrival that brought the center to a standstill. Following nearby airports closing for several hours at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, city redacted. Smaller private airports had a flurry of private planes arriving throughout the night. An anonymous source who works for the airport told, publication to be added once article is sold, exclusively that there were private planes arriving at all hours. We usually see 1 or 2 every couple of days. We're a small airport, but there were so many arrivals, more than I've ever seen. More than any of my coworkers had ever seen too. We're talking about 15 planes in one night. They were all full of people too. The passengers had to state their occupation after landing, and most seemed to be mathematics and science professors. They were from all over the world. Someone must have known it was happening, because the entire staff were told last month to be prepared to be in on Wednesday night. We weren't told why, and we definitely didn't expect anything like that. We suspected they'd just have us painting the floors or something. The following morning, Thursday 16th of August, up to 50 police cars arrived at the center between 7:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. To achieve the high number of police presence, police officers had to have been brought in from other countries, as the local police force only has 38 police officers due to cuts. The police quickly evacuated the center, with cyclists, tourists, and shop owners directed to the outskirts. It was then cordoned off to ensure nobody unauthorized would re-enter Central City Redacted. Following that, traffic was stopped all over the city. Then a large number of private plate cars, whose passengers were protected from view by privacy glass, were seen driving towards the areas that the public had been forced to leave. Disgruntled independent bookshop owner Eva Morgan was amongst many locals to witness the arrival. They shot past the direction of the airport. Without a doubt, they were breaking the speed limit. There must have been a couple every minute, at an accurate enough guess. It went on for an hour, so in total, I lost 2 hours of business. Not that the police care about that, of course. As soon as the cars finished entering the center, the cordon was swiftly lifted, and those that had been evacuated were directed back to resume normality. However, tourists were disappointed to find a major attraction, College Redacted. The library was closed off to the public, and remained so at the time of print. It wasn't only tourists and business owners that were affected. Dr. Raman Elwood, organizer of annual invite-only history event Life History, told publication to be added once article is sold. I've been organizing this wonderful event for 3 years now. Hard-fought-for funding has allowed us to hire various venues across the city in order to host our convention, which includes lectures, seminars, and workshops. Now, just mere days before, I've been told that the whole thing has to be cancelled until further notice because they need the venues for more urgent business. Life History may have been a relatively new event, but I have 200 attendees and 50 history academics due to arrive. And now I need to tell them that it's not happening. It's completely outrageous that I cannot even give them a reason. Those responsible for this abomination should expect to hear from our solicitors. Other than Life History, no public or private seminars are scheduled in or around the city for the following 2 weeks. So the reason behind the arrival of some of the world's brightest minds remains a mystery. As it stands, city police have not responded to any requests for statements. The unexpected cancellation of what is fast becoming one of the world's most popular history events was preceded by an abrupt cancellation of City Redacted, loved and cherished Astronomy Open Evening in March. Held at the city's historical telescope and open to the public, astronomy enthusiasts were gobsmacked earlier this year when Dr. Maria Madden emotionally kicked out attendees halfway through the session, as previously reported by Haley Bennett. Do you have something to share? Contact Haley Bennett at haleybennett@.co.uk. I know I'm not exactly the world's best journalist, but I know a story when I see one, and trust me, this is a story. I'm pasting in the article mentioned above, written when the people who run the public astronomy evenings totally lost their minds and kicked everyone out. Thursday 8th, March 2018. City Redacted. Astronomers to end public open evenings after shock cancellation. Local astronomy enthusiasts were left out in the cold on Wednesday evening when they were abruptly ejected from the popular astronomy open evening held at city's historical telescope in what eyewitnesses have described as a surreal night. Lecturer Dr. Maria Madden, 31, allegedly ended the institute's public session on the lawn outside city's historical telescope 30 minutes early, insisting that everybody leave the area immediately. The public had been listening to a short lecture by Dr. Madden and were due to go inside and use the telescope, guided by members of the institute. An unnamed elderly colleague, described as having a German accent, is thought to have triggered the early dismissal. It is claimed that he became hysterical in the small building that houses the famous telescope and was heard from the outside by members of the public, crying out, screaming for help, and saying, "It's happening, my God, it's happening." An audience of less than 30 attended Dr. Madden's public lecture, which was much less than the average 90 to 100 attendees. This was perhaps due to the unusual bitter weather experienced in City redacted. This week, Mr. Lewis Wright, who was at the public talk with his 12-year-old son, said, "It was all very unexpected. We have attended most open evenings this winter, and they've been professional, but fun. To hear a member of the program having some sort of hysterical meltdown was upsetting. He kept crying out, shouting, 'It's happening.' It was clear he needed help." Following the commotion, Dr. Madden is said to have urged her audience to stay calm before making her way in to attend her distressed colleague. Within minutes, she returned and instructed the entire party to leave. Local amateur astronomer Joanne O'Brien described the scene in more detail. "I heard him crying out for a while before anyone else seemed to notice. I didn't want to interrupt the lecture because it really wasn't very clear what was going on. But then he started screaming out for help. He sounded terrified. I thought he must be having a stroke or a heart attack. Dr. Madden went into him and was back out within 5 minutes. When she came back, she just told us all we needed to leave the grounds. A couple of us asked if she wanted us to stay and help, but she absolutely insisted we left straight away. She was pale as a ghost. In fact, she looked terrified herself. It was a surreal night, to say the least. Even as we were walking away, we could still hear him screaming out. He was shouting, 'My God, it's happening,' over and over again. I tried to contact the Institute when I got home because I was concerned, but the phone line was engaged all evening and nobody responded online." When we contacted for a statement, Dr. Madden sent the following. "On Wednesday, 7th of March, my colleague, who will remain anonymous, experienced health concerns during a public lecture. Some of those attending may have heard his distress, and I am sure they can understand why I made the decision to end the session early. Fortunately, my colleague simply had a minor health scare and is, thankfully, now well again. Though the Institute's open evenings are scheduled to continue until the end of the month, my team and I made the decision to end them with immediate effect. We apologize for any inconvenience." The early closure came as a shock to locals, many of whom regularly attend the open evenings held by the Astronomy Institute. They were not due to end for the summer until the end of March. When we pushed for reasoning behind the decision to end 3 full weeks early, Dr. Madden declined to comment further. It is currently unknown if they will restart at the beginning of next winter. Do you have something to share? Contact Hayley Bennett at hayley.bennett@.co.uk. It might seem like a loose link to the reader, but I've got a growing suspicion that it's relevant. There's more to it that I'm able to write in the article, and I think I might be about to break something big. You see, the anonymous airport source is an ex-boyfriend of mine. When you're a journalist, it's always good to have an ex who works somewhere useful and hangs from your every word. When all the plane full of geniuses were landing, guess who was the one greeting them all? The one and only Dr. Madden. And apparently, she still looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Maybe that's just her face. Or maybe there's something really funny going on here. I've got some leads to follow anyway. Back in March, when Dr. Madden shut down the telescope open evenings from the public, I chased her about it like a hound dog, but she kept totally silent. At the time, I thought they must have been shutting early because of a funding scandal that I could break. But she was too tough to crack, so I let it go. Perhaps naively. I fell hook, line, and sinker for the story about the Yale colleague, so I never tried to interview him. In hindsight, who the hell screams, "My God, it's happening," when they are having a bit of a funny turn? I've got a few questions for him. I've still got 2 more editors to contact to, who I can try and get to publish my article. One of them is a good friend of mine with a weak publication, but a weak publication is better than no publication. For now, I'm going to get some sleep. I'll update when I know more. Quite a lot has happened since I posted last. First off, I need to warn you not to panic after reading this post. Some of it is shocking. However, I urge you to remember that I'm still investigating this in depth, and it's still extremely important not to jump to conclusions until we have all the information that's out there. I'll jump in now and get you up to speed. I sent my most recent article that I shared with you to my final 2 contacts. I received some really strange messages from them in response. I copied them so I could post them here. My first attempt was a senior editor whom I had trained under when I first started out in journalism. He took a distasteful liking to me, if you know what I mean. So in general, I avoid approaching him unless desperate. We exchanged the following messages. 7:31 a.m. H. Bennett. Hi Joel, hope all is well. Sending along a pitch, let me know what you think. 7:32 a.m. H. Bennett uploaded a document. 7:55 a.m. J. Hughes. Hello Haley. Sorry gorgeous, but I'm going to have to say no to this one. I've heard from above that we're not touching anything to do with this. 7:56 a.m. H. Bennett. Who's above you? 7:59 a.m. J. Hughes. The people who pump in the big money, keeping our site ad-free, unlike that shite you were published on a few weeks back. 8 a.m. H. Bennett. Ah, so the people who buy your readers' votes then. Thanks for nothing. Do you care to at least elaborate why everyone is refusing this article? J. Hughes has left the conversation. 8 a.m. J. Hughes. Haley, it is important that you drop whatever it is you think you're chasing. Immediately. It's a non-story, and you're severely damaging the reputation Father passed down to you. If you ever want to publish anything again, then you will let this go. That might not seem like that weird of a message to you. It didn't really to me at first either. However, shortly after speaking to Joel, I messaged my final contact, Michael Hansen. Hansen is a good friend of mine from my uni days. He's an editor of an independent online publication that has a low but loyal following. Our message exchange was extremely weird. 8:45 a.m. H. Bennett. Hiya handsome, I'm sending you an article, let me know. H. Bennett uploaded a document. 9:30 a.m. M. Hansen. Hi Bennett. 9:30 a.m. H. Bennett. You took your time. 9:34 a.m. M. Hansen. Yeah, I know. Listen, who have you pissed off this time? 9:35 a.m. H. Bennett. Who haven't I pissed off? Why do you ask? What's going on? 9:36 a.m. M. Hansen. I was told not to accept any articles from you for the next 3 months. 9:37 a.m. H. Bennett. That doesn't exactly surprise me. Something weird is going on. 3 months seems a bit harsh though. Anyway, you're independent for fuck's sake. Who can tell you not to publish me? 9:38 a.m. M. Hansen. Outside the publication. Legal. I don't even know if I can talk about it. So. 9:40 a.m. H. Bennett. Legal? Okay, this is all getting a bit out of hand. I need to talk to you properly about it all. I think I'm onto something. I'm not entirely sure what yet. Maybe we should work together. Can we meet? M. Hansen has left the conversation. 9:40 a.m. M. Hansen. No, Haley, you need to drop whatever you're going after. It isn't going anywhere, and it's making people angry. It looks like you won't be being published anywhere ever again if you carry this on. Your career will be over. Drop it. Something felt off when I was messaging my first contact. But after reading Hansen's messages, I knew that something was really messed up. Both of my connection had gone offline before immediately sending a suspiciously similar long message warning me off my story. No users typing notifications either. They just appeared instantaneously. It was like they had been copied and pasted in as soon as they left the conversation. And another thing, I've known Hansen since I was 18 years old. In 12 years, he has never, ever called me Haley. I honestly can't remember a single time in all the years I've known him that he's called me anything but Bennett. He is Handsome Hansen. I am Bennett. The more I think about it, the more I am sure that someone hacked into those messages as soon as the conversation went into an area they whoever they might be, didn't want me to drift into. Now, on to the really important stuff. You'll have to forgive me for not giving you this information straight away. It seems huge, and perhaps more relevant to the focus of the entire investigation. The thing is, I have very little evidence that is reputable, so I'm remaining open-minded while I continue my investigation, and I hope you do the same. Now, let's get down to it. I managed to track down the German colleague of Dr. Madden with ease. I basically had to look up the people in the astrophysics department who are affiliated with the Astronomy Institute. There weren't many names to go through really, and one in particular stood out. Professor Bernd Gartner. A quick search online told me that he is an 86-year-old fellow at the most famous college in the city, right on my doorstep. Likely to be of German origin, works with the Astronomy Institute's opening evenings. It seemed the right lead to follow. Unfortunately, you can't just waltz into the ground of this particular famous college and start knocking on the doors of the fellows. So, I had to get a bit sneaky. I waited until night and then managed to slip quietly into the locked back gate after a resident had entered the code. It was surprisingly easy, though I did have to wait for quite a while until someone was entering, as most students are home for the summer. Anyway, I had reached the courtyard within minutes, and because it was late evening, the place was pretty much deserted. I crept around the edge of the perfect lawns, resisting my childlike temptation to step on the grass. Thankfully, it didn't take too long to find what I was looking for. One of the many stone archways that hide the steep wooden steps that led to the residencies of only the most respected academics of the college finally jumped out as relevant, because this particular one had 4 names on gold plaques, and one jumped out. Doctor, Professor, Professor, and lastly, Professor Bernd Gartner. Bingo! Of course, he had to be right at the top, meaning I'd have to tiptoe past 3 other doors. I crept around the spiraling staircase. The silence seemed to cover the entire college, meaning that every creak my steps made echoed all around me. I was sure that one of the doors would burst open and an angry old professor would corner me. But somehow, I got to Professor Bernd Gartner's residence without being stopped. I knocked on the door as quietly as I could. Too quietly perhaps, because after a minute, there still had been no answer. I knocked louder, each thump making my heart hammer in my chest. I waited for 2 minutes, and when there was still no response, I found myself horrendously disappointed. I turned and started back down the staircase, bitterly accepting that I was back to square one. When I heard the door open behind me. "What do you want?" An old, papery voice whispered, the German accent evident. I turned and saw a small, slim man with wide eyes under round spectacles, peering at me. "Professor Bernd Gartner?" I replied. I managed to keep my tone low, but my excitement made a whisper impossible. I didn't wait for him to answer. I was too eager to jump right in. "I'm Haley Bennett. I'm a local writer." "I've been told not to speak with you," he interrupted. I frowned and got ready to fight my corner. However, as I opened my mouth to protest, he opened his door fully and disappeared inside. I followed, my adrenaline buzzing. Closing the door behind me, within seconds I found myself sitting opposite an academically famous astrophysicist as he smoked a pipe and drank port. And so began a very confusing, and in parts, creepy chat with Professor Gartner, who was indeed the man who caused the commotion at the telescope tower in March. So, reader, hold on tight, because here is my journalistic interpretation of our conversation. There are some pretty huge claims in here, but don't let that bypass the fact that there is a glaring lack of detailed information. Remember, keep a critically open mind. Headline to be included by editor. A theoretical astrophysicist with more than 70 years experience has claimed that a cosmic event that could potentially destroy a chunk of the solar system is imminent. Professor Bernd Gartner, 86, a college redacted fellow, has spent a total of 58 years studying a theory that suggests that a specific cosmic event could cause extreme damage to the part of the solar system that houses Earth. Gardner and his research partner, the late Professor Kirill Lebedev, developed the theory in the mid-1950s. After a great number of years investigating, in March 2018, Gardner claims to have witnessed an astronomical anomaly during an open evening held by City Redacted Astronomy Institute. According to Gardner, his finding suggests that their theory was not only accurate, but fast approaching. Gardner spoke to reporter Haley Bennett in an exclusive interview for Editor to Include Headline. He explained that in 1955, we proposed that a particular cosmic event could, in very unique circumstances, really damage the chunk of our solar system that houses Earth. The circumstances were so unique and unlikely that we did not receive fundings to take our workings further, but in our spare time, we pursued it over the years. In the late 1960s, a military satellite picked up on an event that astronomers struggled to explain for many years. However, my research partner and I strongly believe that the event was related to our original theory. In the scenario that the event was indeed related to our theory, then that meant our predictions were a lot more likely than we first believed. We pushed for a team of scientists, but were refused. However, we were given generous positions in our field and able to dedicate our full working time to it. When Gardner's research partner died in 2002, Gardner made the huge decision to cease work on their theory due to the enormity of their scientific investigation becoming too overwhelming in his partner's absence. At that point in their research, the cosmic event they had theorized still seemed unlikely to happen. In Gardner's opinion at the time, it did not justify ongoing scrutiny, a decision he later came to regret. Deciding to work in other areas of astrophysics, Gardner nestled into the background of City Redacted. One of his responsibilities was setting up the city's historical telescope for Astronomy Institute open evenings. In March 2018, Gardner was setting up the telescope ready for public use when he made a shocking discovery. I observed a phenomenon that meant that mine and my partner's theory was much more accurate than we had ever anticipated. Frighteningly so. When asked to elaborate on what this could mean for humanity, Gardner told publication to be added when article is sold. Damage to the planet Earth that will be so severe that humanity will cease to exist appears imminent. It seems likely that we're all going to burn. Although much information is needed in order to provide an assessment of whether Gardner's claims are credible, they have the potential to be extremely concerning. Gardner's claims have come to light following an unexpected influx of mathematicians and scientists in City Redacted, as previously reported by Haley Bennett. When contacted for more information, City Redacted, Center of Experimental Astrophysics, declined to comment. Do you have something to share? Contact Haley Bennett at haleybennett@.co.uk. I don't pretend that I'm a scientific journalist, so my report on what the professor told me is extremely basic. Though, to be honest, everything he told me was clearly a watered-down version of what he knows, or believes he knows, at least. Before you lose your minds and start planning for the end of the world, I'm going to suggest you take a breather. The article you have just read is absolutely full of holes, and that is certainly not my choice. I just didn't get a lot of solid information out of Professor Gardner. I'm not totally sure he's trustworthy, and on a personal level, he was a bit weird. Don't get me wrong, he seems like a really nice man. He's exceptionally intelligent and clearly knows his stuff. But there was something off with the whole meet. For example, right after he said we were all going to burn, he drifted off into a sort of catatonic state and just shut down from me. I literally could not get him to talk to me again after his whole big reveal. I thought he might be ill. He carried on smoking a pipe and drinking port. I guess he just wanted to freeze me out. Anyway, it was odd. I left him a card with my details on, but I doubt I'll hear from him. I'm not saying that what he told me was necessarily incorrect or untrue. But I am saying that it's important to be cautious and not to jump to conclusions. There is more investigating to do before we can create any of our own theories. Unfortunately, I can't even look into the papers he published on his theory for verification. Not only because they're all behind a paywall, but also, I simply wouldn't be able to understand his work. Currently, with such a lack of evidence, I'm not even going to bother pitching this article to anyone, because I know where it will get me. Laughed out of my career. I'm keeping it close though, while I continue investigating. Next, I plan on heading to some of the venues to the life history event I had booked but lost. I suspect I might see some of the mathematicians and scientists that were flown in. Maybe I can get some of them to talk. Oh, and before I sign off, one more thing happened that was weird. In the morning, hours before my weird message exchanges with my journalist connections, I took an early morning walk. On my way past one of our incredibly famous landmarks, I saw that someone had graffitied on it. Now, we have crimes and problems in the city, just like every other place. Not that long ago, someone threw actual human feces at a police officer. And a couple years back, one of the rich students burned a 20-pound note in front of a homeless person. The point I'm trying to get across is that we do get some nasty people here, but to see graffiti on a building that is so historically important to the city is unheard of. My instinct is telling me it has something to do with all the crazy stuff happening here. It was red writing that someone had painted specifically so it would appear that blood was dripping from the letters. I hadn't taken my phone out with me, which is a real shame because it was actually quite beautiful. Luckily, I had a pen and a small notepad in my pocket, so I was able to jot it down. It read, "When the pound drops, it has begun." I walked back past the site of the vandalism many hours later, on my way back from talking to Professor Gardner. It had been painted over. There was no sign that anything had ever been there. I'll update you on everything as soon as I know more. I spent the majority of the day hanging around various venues around the city. Most of the places that Life History had booked were large seminar-style rooms that I couldn't gain access to because they were inside university buildings. I stood at the main entrance of various buildings at the beginning and end of the booking times, hoping to see a large group arriving or leaving. I knew it was a long shot though, because these buildings have tons of exits. Still, I tried with 3 different venues on the off chance it would pay off. I didn't witness anything out of the ordinary. All I saw were everyday types making their way in and out. It was relatively quiet due to the students being off for the summer, so I'm fairly certain I didn't miss any large groups of academics. That didn't mean they hadn't been inside. It just meant I didn't have decent enough access. I had expected that though. The one venue I had real hopes for was the theater. Life History had booked it for 3 hours in the afternoon, and it had a capacity of over 1800. There were only 2 exits and entrances, and they were both easily accessible to the public. An hour before the event was booked, I arrived at the multi-story car park opposite the theater with a decision to make. Should I simply try and question attendees, or should I try and gain entrance to the event? If those attending were who I expected them to be, the mathematicians and scientists that had entered the city just days before, then it would be quite obvious. Large groups of academics usually have a pretty specific style. Smart, casual clothes, quiet and thoughtful actions, middle-class behaviors. It would be very different from the crowds who attended the typical shows held at the theater, such as comedians, bands and plays. There is a distinctive difference between the actions of people attending a work conference and those attending a recreational activity. I knew all the door staff who worked for the theater, as I attended regularly, and I always made a habit of making connections with as many local faces as possible. I was fairly confident I could talk my way into the event. Unfortunately, I was blocked almost as soon as I made the decision to go for it. Just 10 minutes after I arrived at my stakeout position, multiple cars pulled up outside the theater people, and lots of people in black suits surrounded the theater, promptly blocking off access. These were not the usual doormen. They were all more heavily built, and they seemed much more aware of their surroundings. It was very professional and serious security. I stayed where I was. I watched as a slow trickle of smartly dressed middle-aged men and women finally started coming down the street. They all paused in front of the guest store staff, who promptly searched them. I found that very odd, as they don't usually search guests. I watched as their tickets were taken from them by the security staff and scanned by a handheld machine. Then the guests were ushered quickly inside. Before long, the trickle had turned into a swarm. I was sure that these were the mathematicians and scientists who had entered the city, and probably many who already worked and resided here. I would estimate that around 500 people were attending the conference, which, particularly on short notice, is big. When it was nearing the time the event was supposed to begin, I decided to try my luck with asking attendees for interviews. Something about the way they approached the theater told me I would hit a brick wall. They didn't seem to be distracted by any of the historical buildings that surrounded it. None of them seemed to be popping into the famous pub just beside the venue for a swift lunchtime pint. This was definitely not a casual afternoon out. They were like a line of ants, walking methodically to their destination. I had to at least try and talk to them though, so I made my way down the concrete steps to the exit of the car park. When I opened the door that led onto the street, I jumped out of my skin when I physically bumped into one of the security staff, who may as well have been a brick wall. He just stood in the doorway facing me, as though he had been waiting for me to come out. His face held no readable emotion. When I tried to get past, he stood firm, and though I wasn't particularly intimidated by it, I was extremely irritated. He eventually moved aside. However, by that time, there were only a few stragglers left running into the theater. It wasn't a suitable situation to ask any questions. I muttered a passive-aggressive, "Thanks a lot," and made my way onto the street, disappointed and grumpy. I went into the pub next to the theater and waited for 3.5 hours. I wandered out onto the street a few times, and I was surprised to find I could hear shouting coming from inside the theater. Sometimes I walked past at night and hear applause or laughter when a show was on. But this was a bunch of angry people all shouting about different things at once. I couldn't distinguish anything they said, but it was interesting all the same. When they eventually left, they all spilled out and left in various directions. The security staff didn't try and keep me from them this time, so I waited on the street as the attendees passed around me. They barely noticed my presence. There wasn't any excited chatter nor any shouting like I heard from the inside. Instead, they all walked in an eerie silence with desolate looks set on their faces. I tried to call out quick-fire questions to a few of them, but they all ignored me. Within 10 minutes, most people were gone, and that's when Dr. Madden emerged from inside. She stood at the top of the steps to the theater and put her face into her hands. She was obviously stressed out about something. On instinct, I ran up to the steps to talk to her, but before I could get near her, one of the door staff threw out an arm and my chest collided with it. I was winded by his action and doubled over to try and catch my breath. He didn't offer to help me. I don't think he even looked at me. A moment later, I felt gentle hands touching my shoulders. It was Dr. Madden, and she guided me up the steps into the theater. Another security person approached me, perhaps to search me. He stopped dead when she snapped at him authoritatively. "She can come in. Don't touch her." She led me into a side room and got me a drink of water. After a quick swig, I pulled off my backpack, placing it on the table between us. "I'm going to record this," I informed her, pressing the record button immediately, still panting a little. "Oh, and thank you for your help," I remembered to add. To my surprise, rather than shut down and ask me to leave, Dr. Madden laughed resignedly, waving her hand nonchalantly at the dictaphone and gesturing for us both to sit down. Here's a transcribe of our conversation. I haven't seen you for quite a while, Miss Bennett. I was starting to think you had given up. I'm sorry for the way you were manhandled out there. They seem to have no sense of decorum. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you again for your help. You're welcome. Now, regarding what we discuss here in this room, I want to make it clear that nothing that you record will be published. You can try all you want, but no one with any reputation will go anywhere near any of this. And I can't promise to answer all your questions. I'm open to a short conversation though. So, what is it that you want to know, Miss Bennett? Firstly, what was the conference held here today about? A number of things. Optical afterglows and relativistic blast waves, for example. Why were the experts that attended the seminar shouting? There was a heated debate, let's call it, on the moral obligation of scientists. Why were so many mathematicians and scientists flown into City Redacted earlier this week? They're working on a large project that requires many different experts from various fields of science. Is this project related to Professor Bern Gardner's discovery at the telescope in March? Have you spoken to Professor Gardner, Miss Bennett? Are you able to answer the question, Dr. Madden? I'm going to have to insist you turn off the recording device if you would like me to discuss Bern. I did as she asked, because I knew from experience that Dr. Madden was prone to total silence when talking to local press, and I didn't want to push my luck. I was amazed that I even got her to talk in the first place. I had to show her that I was willing to cooperate with her, so I didn't scupper any future chance of correspondence. She basically explained to me that Professor Gardner has Alzheimer's, and that he has been showing signs of getting increasingly confused. She told me that he had worked on a theory an incredibly long time that, yes, was related to the project she had spoken of. In his old age, she told me he was struggling to distinguish some of the wilder and/or earlier aspects of his theory from parts that are currently relevant. I really did not want to ask if humanity was at risk. I mean, after what she had explained, I really felt that something so far-fetched must be preposterous. Professor Gardner being ill made total sense, especially when I thought about how odd he had acted when I had met him. I was worried that if I gave Dr. Madden the impression that I was a potential conspiracy theorist, it might push her into shutting down on me. However, I took a deep breath and asked anyway, because even if it wasn't the end of the world as we know it, there was definitely something major happening, and I had to get to the bottom of it somehow. One thing I will certainly give Dr. Madden great credit for. She has an excellent poker face. She neither burst out laughing at my question, nor did she turn grave and foreboding. She looked at me for what felt like forever, with a total unreadable expression. Then, she smiled sadly and tilted her head to the side, taking a deep breath. Though I'm paraphrasing, the following is quite accurate. She said, "Something is in motion in this city, Miss Bennett, that will lead to a colossal change to the future of mankind. Whether it is a change that is for better or for worse, well, quite simply, we do not yet know. In order to discover this, the magnificent collection of minds that have gathered here must be allowed to decide on a plan of research and action. In order to do this, we need time. We simply cannot allow the press to jump to false conclusions, because we are working on a very complex subject, and even a minor misunderstanding could cause absolute mayhem. You've been locked out from reporting on this for a very good reason. We need to be able to work in order to give humanity the best chance. So please, Miss Bennett, let us do our jobs." Yes, she had an excellent poker face. And I'll tell you something. She made a huge mistake when she stopped using it. Maybe I would have sympathized with her if she had remained expressionless, if she allowed me to draw my own conclusions instead of attempting to lead me to them. When she plastered that sad smile on her face, when she forced a stance and a sigh, it changed the entire way I perceived her break plea for me to back off. Without that smile, I might have listened Instead, she tried to manipulate me. She must have thought I was a fool if she thought I was going to fall for that. Well, I could play that game too, and I was better than her at it. I smiled back and nodded my head understandingly, not verbally agreeing with her plea, but hopefully leaving her with the impression that I had fallen for her bad acting. I left the room not long after, declining Dr. Madden's offer to walk me out, and instead leaving her alone behind me. Another bad move on her behalf, because instead of going to the exit, I slipped into the theater. Just an hour before, it had been full of academics who had apparently been attempting to give humanity the best chance. I knew I only had moments in here. If Madden came out and saw me, I would, without a doubt, sever any ties we now had, and she would know, without a doubt, that I hadn't fallen for her charade. My eyes scanned the room. There was nothing there that particularly stood out from afar, so I jogged up the aisles and glanced down each row of seats. I heard footsteps approaching the main entrance into the auditorium, so I crouched down behind the closest row to me, hidden from sight. The sound of heels clipping the wooden floor echoed around me as my heart hammered in my chest. I didn't breathe until I heard the footsteps retreating back the way they came from. I stood up quickly, ready to make a speedy exit. However, now that I was facing the stage, I could see there was a large blackboard covered in smeared chalk. Whoever had rubbed the contents away had missed the bottom right-hand corner though, and I could see that it said 320 billion pounds. I didn't stick around to think about it, instead jogging quietly up to the far end of the auditorium, which I knew led to the second quieter exit. To my relief, I managed to get out of there without bumping into anyone, so I think the security people must have already left. Thinking about everything that Dr. Madden told me, I have to wonder how much of what she said was true. If I'm honest, as I was interviewing her, I got close to dropping the entire story. Journalists like me reporting on areas of science can have devastating consequences. That might seem dramatic, but if you report on something scientific incorrectly, then it can lead to some problems such as mass information and hysteria. I was strongly considering just leaving all of the experts to get on with it, then watching them bring in actual science reporters and just playing witness to the aftermath. But she tried to manipulate me. Because of that, I know that there is something here for me to chase. What is she trying to hide? And what about the value written on the chalkboard? 320 billion pounds. That's an absolutely absurd amount of money. The richest man in the world only has 120 billion pounds. Why was that figure written there? Well, it's safe to assume that I will not be dropping this story. While I'm still getting leads thrown into my lap, I'm going to keep chasing them. And talking about having leads thrown into my lap, just a minute ago, I watched a grumpy old college porter push an envelope through my door. Inside was a handwritten note from Professor Gardner inviting me to meet with him this evening. I'll update you when I have more. Professor Gardner is dead. I'm in total shock. And he's not the only one. He was one of the 4 deaths in the city yesterday. I don't know what's going on here. It's so hard to fit the pieces of this puzzle together. I just want to go to bed and put this all behind me. But I need to write it all down first, so I can try to make sense of it when I'm a little more with it. I went to Professor Gardner yesterday evening, not long after receiving his note. As I was there by invite this time, I didn't have to sneak in. I was able to go into the college via the main entrance. The porter was expecting me, and he led me up to the professor's residence. I didn't bother saying that I already knew the way, partly because I wasn't keen on revealing I already been there, but also because it's good to make connections with as many people as possible. Porters know everything going around the colleges. The porter was an older man whose knees creaked as he walked, though compared to the professor, I suppose he felt like a spring chicken. He knocked on Gardner's door quietly, and when there was no response, he called out, "Haley Bennett is here, as expected, Professor." When there was still no response, the porter knocked louder. But the professor would not be opening his door ever again. I'm sure that the porter broke protocol, because he got out his own set of keys and unlocked Gardner's door while I still stood behind him. I think I knew then that something serious was wrong. The concern etched on his face, the jangle of the keys and clunk of the lock echoing around the staircase. There was a feeling of foreboding, and when the porter pushed open the door, sure enough, Professor Gardner was slumped over his desk. The porter cried out, "Burned!" and rushed over, shaking him gently. He was limp. After a quick check for a pulse, I was surprised to see the porter's eyes fill with tears. He looked at me almost apologetically as I fumbled around with my phone, preparing to ring the emergency services. "I've worked for Bert for a very long time," he murmured. "Now, he's gone." While we waited for an ambulance, I looked around the professor's living area. The porter told me he had delivered his nightly half bottle of port to his door just an hour before. Everything in the room seemed much as it had on my previous visit, from what I could tell. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe I was just trying to keep busy so I didn't have to stare at the cadaver of an old man. Or maybe I wanted to avoid awkward small talk with the porter. I know that at 86 years old, when suffering from Alzheimer's, it isn't unlikely that you will pass away. Still, I couldn't help but feel that something was off here. Perhaps it was a total coincidence that he died just before I was due to meet him. Or maybe there was more to it. "Was anything different this evening?" I asked the porter. He looked at me confused. "Any unexpected stresses?" I added, so as not to imply anything was off. The porter shook his head. All was as usual. His port arrived a little earlier than expected. I think that was more of a treat than a stress though. I glanced at the bottle on the table. There was a fancy bowl discarded to the side of it. And sure enough, there was a half-empty glass next to the professor's body. The bottle had a quarter left. I did something I'm only slightly ashamed of. I pretended to become overwhelmed by the situation, letting fake tears spill down my cheeks. The porter looked terrified. I spluttered for him to give me some tissues, and when he had disappeared into another room, I quickly slipped the bottle of port into my bag. It was a big risk. If the porter noticed, then I would really struggle to explain my actions. At the same time, it was all I could think to do. This would be closed immediately. The professor's age and health completely pointed to natural causes. I knew it wouldn't be further investigated. Perhaps rightly so, but I had to do something. Once the ambulance arrived, I made my exit and started to walk home. If the porter had noticed, he hadn't said anything. I was still shocked by the outcome of the evening and needed something to take the edge off. So I went to a bar for a couple of drinks. As I sat in a corner alone, I went online on my phone and ordered a drink testing kit for drugs, paying extra so that it would arrive tomorrow. I thought it was unlikely that I would find anything in Gardner's port, particularly something an amateur kid could detect, but I needed to rule it out. After placing the order, I put my phone away and paid some attention to my surroundings. The mood was somewhere in the bar. Nobody played the piano. There wasn't a bustle of chatter. Even the bar staff seemed distant. I drank my pint, then went up for another. As the bartender poured it, I asked her why it was so quiet. She shook her head and looked around before dropping her voice, barely above a whisper. "There's been a suicide. A nasty one." She had a glint in her eyes that told me she was excited to share the morbid gossip. Someone jumped from the clock tower. They're saying he was a scientist. She didn't know anything else. I drank my second pint quickly, then decided to go and check out the clock tower myself. It wasn't surprising to hear of a suicide in the city, in all honesty. With so many people here under so much pressure, there is a surprisingly high suicide rate among students and academics alike. However, to jump from a historical landmark wasn't typical. When I got there, the police were spraying down the pavement underneath the clock tower. There were a couple of people hanging around, and I stood behind them so the police attending wouldn't spot me. Most of the local force recognized me, and I knew they'd tell me to leave straight away. I shuddered as I watched the red water trickling down the gutters into the drain, chunks of clay carried in its flow. I was pleased that the body had already been removed, because I was still shook up over Professor Gardner, though the remains that were floating away left little to the imagination. I looked up at the clock tower, so intimidatingly tall, like all the buildings around here. There was no doubt what your fate would be if you fell from such a height. How could somebody just step out, knowing that in a couple seconds they would be splattered all over the ground so far beneath them? I considered trying to get to the top of the clock tower, but I'm not entirely reckless. Plus, police had taped it off, and it's such a small area that there wouldn't be any sneaking past them. Moments later, a stream of sirens screamed their way past us. 3 police cars, an ambulance, and an emergency responder car soared past in the direction of the other side of the city. A police officer close by to me said something into her radio, and almost straight away, a muffled voice spoke back to her. I didn't understand what they had said. It was mainly in a numbered code that I didn't know. But I watched the police officer look at her colleague, and he promptly turned off the sprayer. Surprising concern swept over her paling face. "Another 2 suicides?" she said, a question rather than a statement. She had forgotten there were spectators around, and as the onlookers near me gasped, she realized her mistake. Her paling face even more so. I stepped through the small crowd, pulling out my press card. "Officer, can you explain what has happened here tonight?" I said, my even and flat tone hiding the fear I felt inside. Well, that was the end of that. I was greeted by a wall of no comment and ordered to leave or be arrested. I shrugged as I walked away. "I'm just doing my job," I called over my shoulder, then walked in the direction the emergency services had sped. The area was cordoned off a lot further than the clock tower had been, presumably because the bodies had not yet been removed. I couldn't see a thing, but I knew the building above and around me was a biomedic center, strictly only accessible by those who worked there. There was a woman crying nearby, being confronted by a paramedic. She had a blanket around her shoulders and was sipping a steaming drink. "I was just walking along," she said, with a hint of hysteria in her voice. "Then they both landed right in front of me." She erupted in tears. I walked around the edge of the cordon, trying to see if I could find anything out. It was dark and a little out of the center, so there weren't many onlookers. I saw 2 people not too far away that, judging by their body language, were having a heated argument. I wasn't getting much from the rest of my surroundings, so I decided to turn on my dictaphone and sneak up close enough to record them, but where I was mainly hidden from their sight. It was a lucky but a good decision. I peered around and saw that the couple having the argument were 2 men. One that looked in his early 20s and a middle-aged, balding man. They were both dressed in expensive-looking black tie suits. I soon discovered they are father and son. Here's what I caught from their agitated conversation, with M1 being the younger one and M2 being the older one. M1: "Is this what it's going to be like? Those involved jumping off buildings left, right and center." M2: "Keep your voice down. You're being very unrestrained. These ones were weak, but there are many more who are prepared to do what it takes." M1: "But why does it have to take so many deaths? How can this possibly be the right way?" M2:
It's the only way, and you know it.
M1.
You seem to think that every little thing LaRue says is the only way, Father. Do you not have a spine of your own?
I heard the crack of slap across skin, and the voices abruptly stopped. I popped my head around the corner and saw the younger man storming quickly in my direction. The redness of one cheek telling me he had just been struck by his dad. Thankfully, he was too distressed to notice how close I was stood, and I slipped back into the shadows before I drew any more attention to myself. He had a mass of eccentric black hair and a frenzied look in his eye. I wanted to follow him, but the older man ran after him just a moment later, grabbing him forcefully by the arm and dragging him towards the road where there was a car waiting. Black paint job, blacked out windows, and private plates. They sped off. There was little else to see at the scene of the suicides. The cordons still hadn't been lifted, and the police refused to comment, telling me to have some respect and wait for the families to make statements. They kept telling me to leave, but the area they had taped off was large enough for me to just go over to the other end, where I wouldn't be noticed for a while. They didn't take my being there too seriously really, so I stuck around for 2 more hours. From what little I had been able to pick up on, it was 2 scientists who had jumped to their deaths. So it seems that 3 scientists jumped from tall buildings in the same night. And Professor Gardner was dead too. As if I needed any more drama that night, I found another piece of artistic vandalism on the wall of a building on my way home. It was the early hours of the morning by this time, a couple hours earlier than I'd seen the last piece when I had been taking an early morning walk. That one had read, "When the pound drops, it has begun." The new one was painted on a different building from the last, and though both buildings were equally historical, they held no link. The center of the city isn't a massive place, so it wasn't surprising that I spotted it. I just needed to be out and about and get a glimpse. I wondered if I had missed one the night before. The new one had the same dripping blood design, and it chillingly made me think of the suicide victim's blood washing away down the drains into the city sewers. This one read, "The children of the rich will be taken first." Does that make sense to you? Neither of the messages make any sense to me. I'll openly admit it. I thought about it all the way home, and though I could not decipher the mysterious messages, they did tell me one very important thing. Someone in the city wants to speak out. I need to find out who. I came close to hitting a dead end when we found Gardner's body. However, the conversation between the father and son that I had overheard outside the biochemistry laboratories has given me a new lead. The name LaRue rang a bell, and when I got home, I looked it up. It took a little while for me to find out what I was looking for, but after some digging, I remembered where I had heard the name. Christopher LaRue. I briefly investigated him when I thought there was a funding scandal going on, after Dr. Matter shut down the open evenings. Shortly after his closure, he donated a large undisclosed sum of money. He's a billionaire CEO of a large private space company. I can't name the name of it here, because there's no way I'm getting involved with his lawyers. Let's call them BOS, and I'll hope that isn't too much to give the company away. He's quite a private person, so it's hard to find information online unless you know where to look. I have just spent a long time looking through the profiles of people he works with directly. I eventually found that one of his colleagues posted on their social media that she is in the city, this city, working on some real exciting stuff. That may well indicate that LaRue is here too. Of course, I can't be sure that the CEO of BOS is the same LaRue that the arguing father and son were talking about. I could be clutching at straws. I do feel like it seems likely though, because the links are quite strong. As it stands, I'm not really sure what to do with this information. So for now, I'm going to sleep on it. And we'll see what tomorrow brings. I'll post again when I know more. Yesterday evening, I took a late nap then headed out onto the streets of the city. I planned out a route that would ensure I would pass all major buildings in the center in a reasonable amount of time. I did this for the majority of the night, repeating a loop around the city. My aim was to catch the mysterious graffiti artist in the act. I have gone over and over the messages, and it makes such little sense to me. I really think I just need to talk to him. Or her. I appreciate the ideas that those of you following my investigation have offered about what they might mean, because I've been stumped. It was a long night, that's for sure. The level of artwork in the previous messages told me that they hadn't been some quick scrawl on the wall job. A lot of talent and passion had been poured into the blood that dripped from every letter. It had clearly taken a bit of time, so I'm quite sure that if the artist had been preparing a new message as I walked around the city, then I would have seen them at some point. However, I didn't catch so much as a glimpse of the mystery artist. I have to admit that I was very disheartened and disappointed, because the story was going cold, and an interview or even a new message to try and understand was just what I needed. Things don't always work out the way we want them to, though. As dawn broke, I headed home and sent off an email to an Australian science journalist that I have loose connections to. I probably would have given it a miss, because it's a bit embarrassing reaching out like that. But during my long evening, as I racked my brain for connections, I remembered that she had written quite an extensive piece on Christopher LaRue, the CEO of the private space company BOS, some time ago. In my email, I gave her a rather brief explanation of everything that has happened. I kept in mind that someone had potentially hacked my messages when I had previously tried to reach out to other journalists, so I tried to keep things vague. At this point, I'm not sure who is watching me. I got some sleep, but in the early hours of the afternoon, I woke to something being pushed through my letterbox. I stumbled out of bed and ripped open a small parcel. It was the drug test strips that I had ordered yesterday. Grabbing a glass from my cupboard, I filled it with the port from the bottle I had taken from Professor Gardner's residence. It was a long shot. I know it. You know it. So you can imagine my total surprise when the test indicated that there had indeed been drugs inside the port. It tested positive for ketamine. I don't know much about the drug myself, but a quick bit of research told me that it is an odorless and colorless tranquilizer, and that it can be deadly when mixed with alcohol. I thought about going to the police. Of course I did. I weighed up the pros and cons of the possible outcomes from sharing this information with the local enforcement. Through me presenting this evidence, an autopsy will surely be ordered on Professor Gardner's body that would eventually lead to his real cause of death. However, what evidence did I actually have? I had taken a bottle from the professor's residence. My fingerprints were all over it. They might draw the conclusion that I had put the drug into the bottle and taken it to cover my tracks. Irregardless of whatever stance the police may have taken, I believed that there was a big possibility that Dr. Madden would hear if I informed them about what I knew. Then, she would be aware that I was investigating Professor Gardner's death. If she knew I had gone to meet him, and if she found out I had taken something from his room, well, she would know for certain that I hadn't fell for a play act in the theater. As things were clearly getting dangerous, and she seemed to be some sort of lead in whatever this was, I decided to keep the poison port to myself. I had already exposed myself more than I wanted to by emailing my Australian connection, so there already was a chance that Dr. Madden might know I was still looking into everything. So I wasn't about to potentially let myself get locked in a prison cell. I know a couple of the readers following my investigation have warned me that I might be in danger. I too feel that I'm only safe while I'm not a threat. And I truly believe that if I presented this evidence, then I would suddenly become a hazard in whatever weird truth was going on behind the closed doors of Dr. Madden and her associates. I did decide to contact the police about something else though. The deaths of 4 scientists in the city should have been very big news, and I hadn't seen it reported anywhere. I rang the liaison officer that I work with when I report anything crime related, and she told me that nothing was being reported until further notice, but that an official statement would be released in due time. All she would give me was that it was presumed to be 3 suicides and 1 death of natural causes. Now, the silence here from the police isn't entirely unusual. There are strict protocols you have to follow when it comes to reporting a death. In my professional opinion, the silence surrounding this suggests to me that these deaths are being treated as criminal cases, meaning any news pieces could potentially damage future trials. Or that news reports are being blocked by someone above, for unknown reasons. I could have whisked up a quick article, keeping the names of those who died anonymous. I didn't want to though. I feel uncomfortable reporting that the deaths are presumed to be 3 suicides and 1 of natural causes. I have evidence that Professor Gardner's death might actually be a murder, so I'm not going to put my name on an article that suggests otherwise. However, I also feel uncomfortable about putting a spin on the report of deaths. You know, like suggesting to my readers that there might be more to this than meets the eye. The problem with that is that some family members might read it, and I do not want to be responsible for causing them more pain than they already are going through. That's not my style. I decided to get out of the house for a bit. I walked into the center and drifted in and out of a few shops. I picked up a copy of a best-selling book from a few years back, a poetic and unique novella about grief. Taking it to the counter, I scrawled a quick note on a card that offered my condolences in my name and number. I asked the cashier to gift wrap it. Then I made my way to the college where Professor Gardner had resided. While I had been walking the streets the night before, I had thought a lot about the porter with whom I had shared the discovery of the professor's body. The tears that had filled his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the wobble in his voice. He had been very upset about the professor's passing, and I felt ashamed of myself for not even asking his name. You see a lot of insignificant people in the city. There are so many who function as servants to the rich, and they spend their life almost without their own persona. And I was ashamed at myself for not even considering what he was going through, for not even thinking to ask his name. I left the wrap gift with a different porter, who assured me he would get the gift to Thomas as soon as he was able to. I felt a little better. We make mistakes in life, and that's fine, but we must always do our best to rectify them if we can. At home, I checked my email. I was surprised to see my connection in Australia had emailed me back so quickly, since I hadn't spoken to her in a long time. I've copied in her email for you to read. Remember, I didn't give her all the details, just the bare minimum. Oh, and she curses quite a bit. Sorry. Hi Haley, it's been a while. What a messed up situation you're in. Sorry to hear that your work's being blocked. Hope I can help you get that sorted. We all need to earn a living. So, I looked into the announcements from around the time that you think this Professor Gardner made a discovery. It hasn't been locked anywhere that I can see, but that doesn't mean you didn't see something. Sometimes, they just keep this stuff local for a while, until they have further evidence. One person seeing something doesn't really mean a lot, especially if they didn't manage to get any data on it. It's just my opinion, but I think you might be barking up the wrong tree. If anything big is happening, it's pretty unlikely that a collection of top mathematicians and scientists will be keeping quiet. They want their research shared far and wide so they get more research grants that let them continue their work. Just like we want our articles being shared far and wide so we get more articles published. I guess, if we're talking about the end of the world, maybe they'd keep quiet so not to cause anarchy or something. LOL. But trust me chick, I've written enough how the world might be end style articles to know that it's not happening. Not for a long time. And it wouldn't be one big event, it'd be a collection of lots of little shitty ones. Climate change probably being the main trigger. Talking about climate change, that leads me to one of your questions. Christopher LaRue. Yeah, I know a fair bit about him. So, straight off, he's a complete dickhead. Total psychopath. I won't go on about that. I'll just get straight to your points. You might have been able to go with an article intended to rustle up some hysteria, based on what's going on in City Redacted, and LaRue's current top secret project. BOS has been building a spaceship capable of further and faster space travel than ever before. And the tech he's using is top secret, Real innovative stuff. Thing is though, he started working on it a couple years ago. So you couldn't make the link between that and what's going on right now in any future articles. Whispers on the street are that this ship is the answer to how we'll survive past climate change. Long time in the future, but not as long as you think. I don't know if you've got kids, but if you have, then they may well be boarding it. I'm not entirely sure why all your regular journals aren't panicking about that end of the world scenario, but whatever. The funny messages you send me sound like a load of bollocks to me. Sorry mate, just sounds like you've got a pissed off student on your hands, decorating the streets with shitty poetry. Probably an ambitious English lit student. LOL. I can't see any link between the messages and anything scientific. Let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. I might not agree with your direction, but it sucks to be blocked. I had it myself last year. It was that bastard LaRue, after I wrote that bio piece on him. I wasn't published anywhere for 6 months afterwards. Nearly lost my house. He's scum. Let me know if I can help you with anything else, okay? I do respect my Australian contact. She's good at her job. I don't think she's right about this though. The thing is, she isn't here in the city, is she? She hasn't got the feel of the streets. I couldn't give her all the details either, so she's drawn a conclusion based on the basic summary I presented to her. I spotted a bit of a link between our situation that she didn't. So she was blocked from being published by LaRue, which caused her to become so financially crippled that she almost lost her house. I've been blocked too, though I don't have any firm evidence that LaRue is behind it. It's seeming more and more likely. Dr. Madden might be powerful, but I can guarantee she wouldn't have the power to block the press from pursuing a hot story. That would take serious money. Most of the time, even if the press are breaking the law, then they'll print something anyway and just remove it once it's had enough views, issuing a rubbish apology at a later date. Blocking everything that has been going on here will have taken serious influence and serious money, both of which LaRue has. I've got to sign off now, because I'm heading out onto the streets again tonight. The mystery graffiti artist is my best lead, and I think I've spotted a small pattern in his work. One night on, one night off, one night on, one night off. So tonight, will he be on? Let's find out. As before, I'll post when I know more.
I guess I always knew there was something off about the small community I grew up in. It's all about context, I suppose. When you're a kid, you just accept what you're told, and the world around you seems normal, if only because you don't know any different. I was struck by tragedy at a young age, losing both my parents to a senseless act of violence. Naturally, this trauma defined my later life, but in the years which followed the loss of mom and dad, I only grew closer to the community around me. They're the ones who were there for me after all. My neighbors were my family. They raised me, looked after me, and helped me through my grief. And then there was Calhoun, the high priest and leader of our community. He became a father to me after my own dad died. I hung on Calhoun's every word, respected him, trusted him, loved him. It all seems so foolish now. Of course, I was raised in a cult. That's obvious to see in retrospect. But this isn't the half of it. Because once I started down the rabbit hole, my old life was gone forever. Let me tell you about Bunker 1, the place where I was born and raised. We lived our entire existence underground, never seeing the sun or feeling the wind against our skin. Calhoun was the father of our community and the oldest amongst our number. He was the only one who remembered the old times, before our people were forced from the surface and took sanctuary below ground. Calhoun spoke of an apocalyptic war which killed billions and poisoned the earth, leaving the surface uninhabitable for decades to come. Calhoun used this mythology to build his religion. He promised that our piety and loyalty would be rewarded. We, the people of Bunker 1, were God's chosen ones. When the time was right, either we or our descendants would return to the surface and repopulate the earth. This was our destiny, or so Calhoun had us believe. When I finally discovered the truth, I hated Calhoun for the lies he told and for what he did to me. But now I realize he faced a difficult choice, and looking back, I have some sympathy for the old man. I understand his motives, even if I can't justify his actions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was a grown man by the time my story begins. By most accounts, I had a good life in Bunker 1. The underground facility was well provisioned and stocked. We had modern amenities, power, and enough food and water to last for decades to come. The community was tight-knit, and everyone had their assigned job or role. Calhoun was loved, respected, and, at least to an extent, feared in his position as leader. There was little dissent to his rule, and few questioned the vision of salvation he offered. And my own future was bright, at least as far as it could be inside an isolated community completely cut off from the outside world. I was engaged to be married to Sonia, an arranged marriage of course, the match being chosen by Calhoun himself. Sonia was a good woman, and I'll admit to being very fond of her, even if my heart was never truly committed to the union. It was expected for me to marry, raise children, and take on a role as a community leader. Sonia believed I was being groomed by Calhoun to take over when he was gone. The high priest was an old man and couldn't carry on forever. My future was set up in front of me. But I wasn't content. I ate powdered or canned food, breathed recycled air, worked under artificial strip lights, listened to Calhoun's repetitive sermons, and looked at murals of blue skies, green fields, and tall trees painted on the bunker's concrete walls. This had been the norm for my entire life. And yet, I now felt there was something very wrong with the small enclosed world I inhabited. I explained it to Sonia whilst we were eating our rice in the dining hall. I sat across from her, the two of us sharing our own table in a room filled with our neighbors, all of us dressed in identical light blue tracksuits. "Doesn't it strike you as odd?" I asked, catching my fiancé's eye as I spoke. "We live underground but have everything we need to live comfortably. Food, clean water, medicine, electricity, refrigeration, plumbing, spare parts for whatever breaks down, and even weapons to defend ourselves with. It just doesn't add up." Sonia wasn't interested in debating me, however. She merely rolled her blue eyes and flicked back her blonde hair before answering abruptly. "I don't know, Eddie. Why are you always asking questions?" I shrugged my shoulders whilst playing with my food, somewhat annoyed by her lack of support or interest. "I'm just curious, that's all," I replied. Well then, you should ask the high priest, she said confidently. He has all the answers. I did ask Calhoun, and his answers made sense. He explained that our predecessors had known war was coming and built the bunker accordingly, kitting out the underground facility with all the supplies and amenities the survivors would ever need, and stocking the stores with enough supplies to last for generations. Bunker 1 was designed to facilitate the long-term survival of its inhabitants. I'll never forget the calm and confident manner in which Calhoun explained such things, as he took on his parental role, brushing back his white hair with his hand and smiling amicably through his yellow teeth. His words seemed sincere, but I'd known the old man for far too long and had learned his tricks. I saw something in his face at the end of that conversation, a twinkle in his eye which told me he was lying. It was around that time when the nightmares began. Again, night terrors were nothing new for me. I'd suffered from them since childhood as a direct result of witnessing my parents die, but these dreams were different, chilling and surreal. I had the distinct feeling I was being constantly watched, with a dark, faceless figure standing over me, out of reach, but observing my every move and reading my every thought. It was a chilling, terrifying feeling. Still, I might have written this all off as paranoia, or perhaps cabin fever. After all, I had no real evidence and no way of proving that Calhoun's story wasn't true. That was until the rats arrived. I vividly recall the first rodent I saw whilst carrying out a stock take in the stores. I almost jumped out of my skin when I saw the big brown rat sitting on the shelf, bold as anything as he stared right at me. They started out in the air ducts and vents, made their way into the food stores, and eventually infiltrated the communal areas, dining hall, and even our personal bunks. This was the greatest crisis our community had faced since the invasion during my childhood. Calhoun took the infiltration very seriously. He warned the community members not to approach the troublesome rodents, claiming they were dangerous and carried diseases. The high priest organized a small team of hunters from his loyalist henchmen. They set about exterminating the rats with a murderous zeal. I didn't share Calhoun's enthusiasm for the killing spree, however. One of the rodents began following me around, a brown male rat who almost seemed tame. I first saw him in the stores, then in the offices where I was working, and finally in my bunk room. I took to feeding the rat scraps and crumbs, although I never saw him eat. Still, I didn't make any effort to harm the rodent, nor did I report his presence to the hunters. In fact, I took a liking to the small creature and looked forward to seeing him scurry out from the air vents. I even gave him a name, Roland the rat. But the wider implication of the rodent infestation wasn't lost on me. I spoke to Sonia about my theory, not in the crowded dining hall, but while we were courting in private inside her bunk, a part of the premarital ritual. I'll confess, it wasn't my best pillow talk and certainly killed the passion of the moment, but I needed to talk to someone, and I thought I could trust my fiancé. Calhoun isn't telling us the truth. You know that, don't you? Sonia shook her head in frustration, pulling the sheet to cover her naked body. I could already tell she didn't want to have this conversation, but I persevered nonetheless, hoping I could get through to her. The rats, that's what I'm talking about. Where did they come from? From the air ducts, obviously, Sonia replied whilst looking down at her toes. I mean, before that, I snapped, my frustration seeping through. These rodents aren't native to our bunker. That means they must have come from the surface. So if they can survive topside, then we can too. Sonia looked at me like I was crazy, sitting up in bed whilst her blue eyes bulged. What the hell are you talking about, Eddie? You know it's not safe out there. We'll die if we leave this bunker. That's what Calhoun says, I shot back. We've trusted him blindly all these years, but the rats prove he's been lying to us. Sonia exploded at this statement, rising from the bed and standing over me, wearing nothing but a white bedsheet, her eyes full of fury as she shouted me down. This is bullshit, Eddie. Sonia screamed. "I don't know what's got into you, but I won't stand for this talk. The high priest is our leader. He's protected me, protected you all these years. We owe him everything." I didn't have any response to her tirade, instead looking away and silently staring at the bare wall. "Damn you, Eddie," Sonia cried out, whilst angry tears rolled down her cheeks. "Damn you to hell." With that, she stormed out of the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I knew from this moment that we'd never be man and wife. We were on entirely different wavelengths, and I couldn't trust Sonia any longer. I don't know for sure, but I strongly suspect Sonia told Calhoun all about my lack of faith. The high priest asked me to stay behind after the next morning's sermon, calmly requesting that I sit and talk with him under the painted mural depicting green fields, blue skies, and an orange sun, which adorned the back wall of the temple directly behind Calhoun's pulpit. "Now then, Edward," he began, holding my gaze as he assumed the role of a well-meaning patron. "What's all this I'm hearing? Honestly, I'm rather concerned about you, young man." I was taken aback, almost stuttering out my response. "I don't understand, sir." "Rats," Calhoun blurted out, louder than I would have expected him to. "You've become obsessed with these damn rats, and you've been spreading your ridiculous theory. Is this not true?" Suddenly, I felt I was subject to an inquisition. "I was just wondering where the rats came from," I answered defensively. "Is it so wrong to ask questions?" "It is when you're spreading conspiracies which cause dissent in my community," was Calhoun's firm response. "Let me tell you, Edward, these rodents do not come from the surface. Rats have lived underground with us since day one. They've come to Bunker 1 because their food supply has been exhausted. Now they're eating through our stores and chewing up our wiring. This cannot stand, Edward. The rodent infestation is an existential threat to our community and must be stomped out." I nodded my head. It was hard to argue with the high priest's logic. Still, there was one thing I didn't understand. "You say the rats' previous food supply ran out. That means they must have come from—" "Yes," Calhoun replied solemnly. "The rodents have migrated from Bunker 2. The mere mention of that godforsaken place brought a chill down my spine. My head was suddenly filled with nightmarish images, buried memories from my childhood of the invasion of '08 and the brutal murders of my mom and dad. Calhoun surely must have realized the impact of this revelation, and he softened his tone whilst speaking his next words. "It's my fault, really. I've felt responsible for you since your parents died, and I've shielded you from certain uncomfortable truths. That ends now, Edward. You've been kept off the guard roster for too long. But now you must do your duty, young man. From tomorrow, you'll be working with Nicholas at the barricade. He'll show you the ropes." My jaw dropped. I was disgusted by Calhoun's instruction and realized this new duty was surely meant as a punishment. I wanted to speak out, to shout that I wouldn't do it, but I found myself unable to speak. I simply sat defeated as Calhoun stood and began to walk away, pausing only to pat me on the back and speak in my ear. "I think this experience will be a real eye-opener for you. Good luck, Edward." Calhoun was right about that at least. My eyes were opened during the days which followed, but not in the way the high priest had anticipated. Less than 12 hours later, and I was at my new post, shivering in the cold and dark tunnel as I took my lead from Nick, a veteran guard and Calhoun loyalist. I looked to my comrade, gray-haired and sturdy, dressed in the standard blue tracksuit and with a loaded crossbow slung over his shoulder. Nick gave the appearance of a grizzled veteran tasked with defending the border from an ever-threatened barbarian attack. He looked at me under the dim light with a mix of contempt and suspicion, and I suspect Nick wasn't happy about my arrival at his post. We stood in front of the barricade crudely constructed from sheet metal and stared down the long and narrow corridor, dimly illuminated by failing lights in this unmaintained section of the vast underground complex. The tunnel was the only link between bunkers 1 and 2, and thus it had to be kept under constant guard. I had a good reason to fear what lay at the far end of the tunnel, and that fear was due to the invasion of '08. That's when the Bunker 2 people had attacked en masse, piling through the narrow tunnel, pillaging and slaughtering as they came. Our side rallied under Calhoun's leadership, and eventually the attack was beaten back, but many died during the savage battle, including Mom and Dad. I remember my mother telling me to hide as the invaders smashed down our door. Father tried to fight them, but there were too many. They cut Dad down first and then went for my mom. The rest is a blank in my memory. All I can remember is the blood and bodies that wouldn't wake. It was hours before rescue finally came. We knew little about Bunker 2 and its inhabitants. They came down here at the same time we did, but something went very wrong in their community. In Bunker 1, we call ourselves the Beautiful Ones. Rather arrogant, I thought, but the name was Calhoun's idea. Meanwhile, Bunker 2's people were the Fallen, the Barbarians. Whilst our community was well ordered and relatively comfortable, Bunker 2 had fallen into violent anarchy. The invasion of '08 was their attempt to take what we had. They failed, and there hadn't been another attempt in the many years since. But the threat remained, and the guard had to be maintained. Contacts are pretty rare these days, Nick explained in a gruff voice. Occasionally, one or two will come down the corridor, but they scare pretty easy. Still, they're sneaky bastards, and you always need to be on your guard. What about the rats? I asked. Rats? Nick replied in a puzzled tone. Yeah, Calhoun said they came from Bunker 2. Well, they didn't come through here, Nick said defensively. Probably through the air ducts. Anyway, don't worry about it, kid. I'm going to get some shut-eye. You need to take the first shift. I felt a cold shudder whilst glancing down the dark tunnel, focusing on a flickering light in the distance. What happens if I see one? Nick scoffed as he passed me the crossbow. It's not likely, but if you do see someone approach, shout a warning. Usually that's enough to scare them off. If they keep coming, you shoot. Shoot? I exclaimed in shock. We don't screw around anymore, Nick replied with a smirk. Not since '08. Orders are shoot to kill. But don't worry, kid. Odds are you'll have a long, boring night. Just don't fall asleep, okay? Hours passed, Nick snoring as he lay on his makeshift bunk behind the barricade whilst I kept watch. Nick was almost right. Most of the shift was quiet. I was a bag of nerves, jumping at every sound and shadow. But nothing happened. Until it did. During the early hours, I saw movement in the darkness. A shape moving through the dim light. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. But then I saw a figure emerging from the shadows and running towards me. I raised the crossbow to my shoulder, trying to control my fear as I shouted out, "Don't come any closer. I'm armed." The figure either didn't hear or didn't listen. I could see him now under the tunnel's failing lights. The interloper was a kid, maybe in his teens. He was dressed in a dark red tracksuit, the standard uniform of the Bunker 2 people. Although I noted how his outfit was ripped and soiled. The kid himself was skinny, his skin pale and eyes filled with hunger and desperation. "Don't you hear me?" I cried out. "Stop now and turn the hell around. I mean it." "Please don't shoot," the kid pleaded as he abruptly stopped running and held up his hand defensively. "I just want food, that's all." He was only 10 yards away from me now. A single squeeze of the trigger and the bolt would be lodged in the kid's chest. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill an unarmed young man. My hands were shaking as I clutched hold of the crossbow. We stared at each other across the gap, and for a moment, everything froze. But a second later, I heard a gruff voice from my rear. Nick had awoken from his slumber. "Shoot him, Eddie. He's crossed the line. You have to finish it." The kid's eyes bulged in terror as he pleaded for mercy. "I'm sorry. I just wanted food. But I'll go back. I'll go back." "Too late, asshole," Nick replied cruelly. "You should have listened to the first warning. Now we've got to make an example out of you. Shoot him, Eddie." But I wouldn't. No, this isn't right. He's not a threat. It doesn't matter, Nick replied, the fear now coming into his voice. The High Priest's orders are clear. Calhoun wouldn't want this, I shot back, looking over my shoulder whilst keeping the crossbow trained on the kid. I'll take the prisoner to him. Calhoun will show mercy. I know it. I was winging it. Didn't know what I was doing. But I couldn't let this kid die. Nick was uncertain now. He wasn't happy with this change of protocol. Clearly, it scared him. Fine, he finally answered. You take the prisoner back and I'll stay here, but on your head be it, Eddie. I nodded, motioning for the kid to move and noting the relief in his hungry eyes. The Bunker 2 prisoner didn't give me any problems on the march back home. I guess he was just grateful to be alive. I asked them questions but got few answers. The kid's name was Kyle. He was scared, hungry, and running from some unspecified horror in his home bunker. I expected Calhoun to be angry at my disobedience, but never thought he'd take it so far. The High Priest's initial fury at his midnight service being interrupted was followed by a hasty order for his henchmen to gather the entire community in the temple. All 102 of my neighbors, from the youngest infants through to the elderly. I saw them all pile into the overcrowded place of worship, assembling under the mural of the great outdoors. There was Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, the nice couple who lived in the bunk next to me, with their infant son Isaiah. Beside them stood Owen, the head engineer in charge of the water purifiers, and Yasmin, the kind-hearted head teacher at the community's small school. And amongst the crowd was Sonia. Our eyes met through the chaos, and I saw nothing but hostility. I realized then that something significant had changed. These were no longer my friends and neighbors. They were strangers to me now. Calhoun stood at the pulpit, watching over his faithful. Meanwhile, two of his henchmen, Duncan and Mo, kept a tight hold of Kyle, the terrified prisoner from Bunker 2. As for me, I was reduced to the status of a paralyzed observer, unable to act as events played out in front of my eyes. Once the crowd had fully assembled, Calhoun cleared his throat and spoke out to capture their full attention, his booming voice filling the hall. My faithful, my children, it is with great regret that I call you here tonight, but alas, I've been left no choice. He paused, staring at me with anger and disappointment in his hard eyes, as he pointed me out to the crowd. Brother Edward has betrayed us. Foolishly, he disobeyed orders and brought this into our fold. Duncan and Mo dragged Kyle forward. The kid tried to fight, but was too weak. This invader has come from Bunker 2, Calhoun announced with a barely concealed rage in his voice. He is corrupted by the evil which dwells in the fallen bunker. Many of us are old enough to remember their invasion in 08, when these savages slaughtered our friends and family members without provocation or mercy. A wave of angry murmurs arose from the crowd, and more than a few hateful glares were cast in my direction. Clearly, this intruder is a spy sent by the barbarian leaders of Bunker 2. He cannot be allowed to return and report what he's seen. We must make an example of him. A roar of approval went up from the bloodthirsty mob. Calhoun shushed his people before calling out 6 names, ordering them up to his pulpit. There, he handed them 6 daggers. It was clear what the intention was, and one of the 6 was Sonia. I cried out and tried to push forward to stop the savagery, but I was grabbed from behind and held back. The kid squirmed and begged for mercy, but he would find none. One by one, the executioners stepped forward and stabbed Kyle repeatedly in his chest and stomach. The poor kid screamed in agony, losing strength as his young blood spilled on the temple floor. When it was Sonia's turn, she paused briefly to look in my direction. Our eyes locked, and I swore I could see apprehension and fear in her pale face. Sonia didn't want to do this, but she didn't have the strength to go against the mob. I could only watch in awestruck horror as my ex-fiancé stabbed the dying Kyle in the guts, finishing the brutal ritual and ending the innocent kid's life. and I fell to my knees, crying out as angry tears rolled down my cheeks. I was surprised that they let me walk away from the murder scene. Frankly, I have expected for the mob to turn on me next. I still wonder whether they would have killed me if Calhoun gave the order. I'd grown up with these people, considered them family. Hell, Sonia was going to be my wife, but I wasn't one of them anymore. Not after that night. Still, Calhoun didn't throw me to the mob, and I was allowed to return to my bunk under their hateful glares. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw Kyle's brutal murder all over again. I lay on my hard mattress and stared up at the ceiling. It was hardly a surprise when I saw my bedroom door slowly open and a large figure creep in, his face hidden by the darkness. I didn't move an inch, pretending to sleep to draw the intruder into a false sense of security. I saw the knife in his hand as he slowly advanced, and then his grizzled face was illuminated by the light from the corridor. It was Nick, and he'd come here to kill me. I waited until the last possible second to move, allowing Nick to plunge his knife harmlessly into my mattress. Next, I hit Nick with all the force I could muster, knocking my would-be assassin down to my bedroom floor. A desperate life and death struggle ensued as we fought each other for supremacy. I don't know how, but somehow I got hold of the knife and I plunged the blade into Nick's chest, through his ribcage, and into his heart. Nick collapsed heavily against the wall, his eyes filled with shock and pain as a crimson tide poured from his wound. He looked up at me in the last, opening his mouth in an attempt to speak. Instead, Nick's mouth filled with blood and his eyes rolled up into his skull. And then he died. I still held the bloody knife in my shaking hand when suddenly the bile rose up my throat and I vomited on the floor. I had killed a man, a member of the community. Yes, it had been self-defense, but that wouldn't matter. There was no way back for me after this. I stumbled out of my bunk room and into the corridor, still in a daze and not sure what to do. But I didn't get far, because Calhoun was out there waiting for me. The gray-haired, sharp-eyed man stood in the well-lit corridor, wearing his standard blue tracksuit and covering me with a loaded crossbow aimed at my chest. Calhoun saw the bloody knife in my hand and didn't even seem surprised. "Nicholas is dead then," he said without much emotion. The words almost stuck in my throat as I replied, "You sent him to kill me." "Yes," Calhoun replied with a nod, whilst keeping his finger firmly on the trigger. "Nicholas should have taken charge at the barricade. This was his mess to clear up, but alas, he has failed." "Now you'll have to do your own dirty work," I snarled in defiance. Surely, Calhoun would kill me, but yet he hesitated. "It didn't need to get to this," Calhoun said with a sad frown. "You should have kept your head down and followed the rules." He shook his head, before lowering the crossbow ever so slightly. "Who am I kidding?" Calhoun continued with a thin smile. "I always knew you were too smart for this charade, Edward. It was only a matter of time before you saw through the gaps." My jaw dropped as I considered the implications of his words. "So you've been lying to us?" I stated with some satisfaction. Calhoun gnashed his teeth before answering. "Bunker 1 may have been based on falsehoods, but whatever lies I've told are necessary for our continued survival. But that's irrelevant now. You are no longer part of this community, Edward. I could shoot you down where you stand, but I can't bring myself to do it. I'm going to give you a head start. 5 minutes before I sound the alarm. Go forth and seek the answers you desire, although I don't believe you'll like what you find." Calhoun raised his crossbow again, his eyes hardening. He was giving me a chance to live, and I was determined to take it, sprinting down the corridor and out of sight. With the bulkhead door to the surface sealed shut, there was only one other place I could go: back to the barricade. Soon I was standing at the barrier of sheet metal and once again staring down the ominous corridor. The lights were flickering and the tunnel appeared even more foreboding. My nostrils even picked up on a foul smell coming from somewhere down there. A stink of creeping death. Every instinct in my body told me not to go down that godforsaken tunnel. But what choice did I have? I briefly considered returning to Bunker 1 and trying to persuade the others of Calhoun's deceit. But I knew this would never work. Still, I hesitated, frozen to the spot as I imagined the horrors before me. But then I saw him, Roland the rat, climbing over the barricade and squeaking at me as he made his way down the corridor. I swear my rodent companion stopped and looked back, motioning for me to follow him. And I did so, mustering the courage to cross the border and march into the unknown. Meanwhile, the sirens of Bunker 1 blared behind me, and I knew I couldn't go back. I knew next to nothing about Bunker 2 before I entered the subterranean purgatory. It was an alien place in my mind, a hostile territory where monsters dwelt. And when I reached the end of the connecting tunnel, I didn't know what to expect. As it turned out, the differences between the two bunkers were subtle at first, but became more apparent the deeper I explored. The underground shelter was a sprawling network of concrete and metal, one of seemingly endless corridors and sub-bunkers. At first inspection, it was much the same as my home in Bunker 1. Certainly, the two facilities were constructed by the same architects. Bunker 2 was significantly larger than 1, however, built to accommodate hundreds. And yet, it was some time before I ran into any people, which suggested there had been a substantial population crash. Honestly, I appreciated my home the farther I progressed into the second bunker. Our facility was tidy and well maintained. It even had touches of color in the form of the murals Calhoun had painted on our walls. Not so in Bunker 2, where the walls were gray and drab. What's more, everything over here seemed to be in a state of disrepair. From flickering or non-functional lights, leaking pipes, smashed-in doorways, and machinery broken down and left to rust. Frankly, I was amazed the facility was still inhabitable. And yet, the air was breathable, and there was no significant light for me to navigate my path. More concerning were the signs of violence I witnessed: broken barricades in lonely corridors, scorch marks on the walls, and dried blood on the floors. It brought a cold chill to my bones when I imagined the horrors that had once occurred in these halls and corridors. I saw no human beings during the first few hours of my exploration. But I wasn't alone. Roland was my companion during the trek. Sometimes the rodent disappeared from view for several hours, scuttling off into the shadows or down the pipes. But he always came back, appearing under my feet and looking up at me with his big brown eyes. It was the strangest thing, because it often seemed that Roland was guiding me, leading me deeper into the bunker and directing me towards something. Or perhaps I was just losing my sanity. In any event, it was about 6 hours before I encountered the first human resident of Bunker 2. And this meeting was not a good one. I saw the shambling figure emerging from the corridor behind me and almost jumped out of my skin. The person who emerged was an elderly woman, her hair long and white, and her skin wrinkled. Her red tracksuit was ancient, worn, and hanging off her thin and frail body. She limped towards me with her bony hands held out. But it was her bloodshot eyes that shocked me. Her eyes filled with hunger, desperation, and madness. The elderly woman wasn't much of a physical threat, but there was something about her which made me feel unsettled. I still had the knife I'd taken off Nick, but the dagger was tucked into my waistband, and I was reluctant to use it again, even in self-defense. So, I attempted to resolve the situation with my words. "Hello, ma'am. Do you need help?" The woman's eyes widened, and she opened her crusty lips to speak in a hoarse voice. "Hungry. I'm so hungry." I shrugged my shoulders. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any food." I watched in horror as her face twisted, and she snarled her next words. "Meat. You are meat." She lurched forward aggressively, and I reacted in instinct, pushing her down to the hard floor. The woman fell hard and I heard something crack. Maybe she'd broken something, but the woman's hostility towards me didn't diminish. She hissed like a cat whilst glaring up at me with hate in her eyes, grasping out with her claw-like hand. I'll confess that I broke in that moment, fleeing down the corridor as the fallen woman screamed after me. I left the crazed and starving lady in my wake, but was left wondering what had happened in Bunker 2 and how far its people had fallen. Unfortunately, I soon got my answer. Another corridor with flickering lights, except there was a foul smell down there. A rancid stink of rotting flesh. I shouldn't have gone down there. Of course, there was something horrific at the end of the corridor, but I needed to know the truth, no matter how terrible it would be. Advancing cautiously into the darkness whilst holding my nose, I soon found the source of the stench. Because there, in an abandoned bunk room set off the dimly lit corridor, was a human corpse. The body was badly mutilated, so much so that I couldn't tell the victim's gender. The skin and much of the flesh was stripped away, exposing the white bones underneath. The sight and smell were so bad that I retched, but nothing came up because my stomach was already empty. I hadn't seen a dead body in many years, not since my parents were murdered. And even then, the victims of the '08 invasion were dealt with compassionately and efficiently, burned in the incinerator, as was the tradition in Bunker 1. But leaving a body out to rot seemed barbaric to me. That wasn't the worst of it, however. I forced myself to observe the bloody corpse in closer detail, hoping to find some evidence on the cause of death. At first, I assumed the victim had been eaten by rats. But no, the flesh hadn't been torn apart with teeth. It hadn't been sliced from the bone by a knife. This victim hadn't just been murdered. They'd been butchered. I stumbled away from the bloody scene, my whole body shaking as I was overwhelmed by feelings of revulsion and terror. The implication was obvious. The Bunker 2 people I'd encountered were starving, so clearly food was in short supply over here. But now I realized how bad it had got. Clearly, there were some who'd resorted to cannibalism. I experienced an existential dread in that moment as I fled from the scene. I'd sought out the truth. Calhoun told me I wouldn't like what I found, and he was right. How foolish I'd been. Life in Bunker 1 had been a lie, but it was safe and comfortable back home. Here, it was living hell, worse than I could have imagined. Why had I come here? Why didn't I keep my mouth shut and follow Calhoun's rule? I regretted my disobedience now, but it was too late to go back. I guess I was still in a shocked daze as I stumbled farther into the damned bunker, because I didn't spot the ambush until it was too late. Two figures darted out in front of me, blocking my path. I took a step back and instinctively made to retreat, but another two had crept up behind me, boxing me in. I reached into my waistline and withdrew my knife, even though I had little to no hope of defending myself against this quartet. Observing my opponents, I noted that they were all female, young women in red tracksuits. All four were lean and thin, but they shared a fierce and determined look, and all were armed with long steel javelins which aimed menacingly in my direction. These were tough women in the mold of Amazonian warriors. I had no doubt they could and would kill me if it came to a fight. Nevertheless, I continued to hold out my knife in a futile act of defiance. Three of the women held the line with their spears, while the fourth, their leader, marched forward to confront me. My heart almost stopped when I saw her. I almost called out a name before I caught my mistake, because this female warrior was the spitting image of Sonia, my ex-fiancée. Sure, this rat-coated woman was leaner, tougher, and more determined, but she had Sonia's eyes, hair, and facial features. I was awestruck and speechless as the blonde-haired woman approached, holding out her spear as she came. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. I opened my dry lips and somehow found the words to reply. "Eddie. My name is Eddie." The lead woman nodded her head as if my first name was all the information she needed. But her companions weren't convinced. "Cass, don't listen to him," shouted a dark-haired woman behind me. "He's with the Rat Pack. Has to be." "No," Cass said firmly, her hard eyes still focused on me. "He's not Rat Pack. Look at his uniform. Light blue. You're from Bunker 1, aren't you, Eddie?" I nodded my head in confirmation. "Bunker 1?" asked the third woman in confusion. "Why would you leave to come here?" I looked to Cass, but she said nothing, as clearly she expected me to answer. "I had to leave. Got in trouble with the high priest. There was nowhere else to go." "That's bullshit," cried the fourth woman. "He's a damn spy." "Maybe he is," Cass answered thoughtfully, "but we'll bring him back to camp to find out for sure." She nodded to the knife still in my hand. "I suggest you drop that, Eddie, unless you intend to take us all on." I inhaled, thinking for a moment before dropping the blade, hearing it clatter on the hard ground. Cass seemed appreciative of my cooperation. She lessened her grip on the spear and grabbed the bottle from her belt, casually tossing it into my waiting hands. "Take a drink, Eddie. I'm sure you can use one." I smiled whilst opening the bottle and drinking the cold water contained within. I thought I'd found a friend in Cass, but had no idea what awaited me back at the Amazon camp. The Bunker 2 settlement was based in a dining hall similar to the one we had back home. But while our hall was a place of peace and community, this was a room of desperation and hunger. I noted several things whilst I was frog-marched through the hall by the 4 female warriors. There were about 50 or 60 people spread throughout the space, sitting at steel tables whilst staring longingly towards the canteen. I witnessed how the children were the only ones active, and they were out of control, almost feral as they fought each other with food trays and jumped all over the tables. Their mothers made no effort to control their offspring, merely watching them with dead eyes and indifference. And it was only mothers. There were hardly any adult males, and the few men I could see were elderly and unresponsive. It seemed that this small community was run and protected by women, and this puzzled me. My curiosity got the better of me as I whispered the question to Cass, who strode by my side. "What happened to all the men?" I asked. Cass simply shrugged her shoulders before responding. "Dead mostly. Killed each other in vendettas and duels. Those who survived ran off to join the Rat Pack, and those bastards have been wreaking bloody mayhem for years." I took note of her words, but made no further comment. This was the second time I'd heard mention of the Rat Pack. I didn't know who they were, but guessed this group were bad news. I did notice how I received suspicious and hostile looks from many in the assembled crowd, and this brought back painful memories of my treatment in Bunker 1. But I tried to reassure myself that these people were simply curious. In any event, my attention was soon drawn to the canteen at the back of the hall, where a trio of beleaguered caterers emerged with trays of food. The community members responded with great enthusiasm as they piled forward, but Cass and her warriors were there to keep control. "You know the drill, people," Cass demanded. "Everyone will be served. Stand in line and wait your turn." There were grumbles from the crowd, but they eventually complied, forming an untidy line as they queued up for their breakfast. Cass tapped me on the shoulder, smiling whilst asking, "You hungry?" I nodded my head and allowed her to lead me to the back of the line, although I noted the harsh glares from those in front of me. The hostility only grew worse as I reached the front of the line and was served food by a hard-faced dinner lady. I glanced at the tiny portion of beans dished out to me and thought I was being deliberately underserved. But when I looked to the other plates, I saw we'd all received the same meager offering. There was rationing in Bunker 1, of course, but our stocks were ample and we didn't have to survive on starvation rations like these. And as I ate, I realized why the crowd were so hostile. "Why the hell does he get to eat?" cried a middle-aged woman who pointed accusingly at me. "Our children are starving. We don't have enough for another mouth," shouted another. Once again, an angry mob was turning against me. I started to back away, setting down my plate in the process. But thankfully, Cass stepped in to defend me. "Come on, people. Eddie is our guest. I invited him." "He's an outsider from Bunker 1, cried out the dark-haired warrior. "We can't trust him." The suspicious murmurs escalated, and I could tell the situation was getting out of control. So I held my hands up defensively and spoke. "I'm not staying, just passing through. I don't want any trouble." "Yes," Cass added. "He's leaving, and I'm escorting him out." This seemed to quell the mob's anger as they slowly drifted away and returned to their food. Meanwhile, Cass took me to one side, picking up her javelin before handing me back my knife. "I know some people who can maybe help you," she explained. "But we need to be careful because we'll be traveling through their territory." I nodded my head, wondering who Cass was referring to and what dangers lay ahead. But I couldn't stay here, and I had no choice but to trust her. We walked out from the dining hall and proceeded deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. I was nervous, but experienced a moment of joy when I spotted Roland scurrying along the floor ahead of us. It was the first time I'd seen the rodent in some time, and his presence brought me renewed hope. But I didn't say anything to Cass, instead waiting for her to start the conversation. "So why did you leave?" she asked abruptly as we negotiated yet another featureless corridor under failing lights. "Huh?" I said in confusion whilst looking at her. "Bunker 1, why did you leave? Are they running out of food? Or has the High Priest lost control?" Not exactly," I replied, before reluctantly recounting the grisly tale of Kyle's brutal execution following his capture at the barricade. Cass didn't seem shocked or angered by my story. Instead, she merely nodded her head in grim resignation, as if such acts of brutal violence were a fact of everyday life. "You know, Bunker 2 wasn't always like this," she said thoughtfully as we continued to walk. "When I was a girl, this place was well ordered and peaceful, and we had enough food for everyone." "So what happened?" I asked. Cass shook her head, trying to control her emotions as she answered. "People got greedy, wanted more than their fair share. There was fighting, and half our food stores were looted or destroyed. We've been hungry ever since." Suddenly, something clicked in my head. "When did this happen?" I inquired. "Back in 08, was her answer. "You people invaded us that year, slaughtered us." "We were desperate," Cass replied defensively. "All we wanted was food." "My mom and dad were murdered that day," I shouted angrily. Cass took a deep breath, acknowledging my pain when she spoke next. "I'm sorry. Sorry for your loss, Eddie. Our people went too far. But you've got to understand, we all suffer under the same system. And Calhoun, your leader, he knew we were starving and didn't lift a finger to help." I nodded. This latest revelation was disappointing, but not surprising. But there was something which still puzzled me. This talk of a system that kept everyone down. "Where are you taking me?" I asked nervously. "I'm bringing you to another community, one that I think can help you and give you the answers you need." I wanted to ask more, but Cass stopped us dead in our tracks, her attention drawn by a suspicious sight or sound. "Stop. Wait," she whispered. I didn't know what Cass was reacting to, but a second later, and an arrow flew past my ear, striking the wall directly behind me. I reacted with shock, realizing I'd only been inches from death. But Cass shook me from my paralysis, grabbing my arm and shouting, "Run! She took off down the corridor, and I followed, but we didn't make it far. A bulky figure emerged from behind a corner, striking Cass hard with a lead pipe. I stopped abruptly to face the attacker, only to be hit from behind, feeling a sharp pain in my back which forced me down to my knees. A moment later, and both Cass and I were being roughly dragged across the ground by a gang of men, thugs who cursed and laughed as they inflicted pain. They flung us inside an empty storeroom, and only then could I comprehend this grim situation. Cass and I had been ambushed, disarmed, beaten, and taken prisoner, all in a matter of seconds. 3 men were blocking the only exit from the room, a trio of fat, sweaty thugs with sadistic smirks on their lips and murder in their eyes. They all wore the standard Bunker 2 red tracksuits, but their outfits were customized by grotesque trophies, human teeth and digits hanging from strings around their necks. I looked to Cass, who lay on the floor beside me, and saw genuine fear in her blue eyes. I didn't know who these men were, but could hazard a guess. The infamous Rat Pack, hunters and cannibals of Bunker 2. A moment later, and the 3 thugs stood aside, allowing another 2 to enter the cell. The first man appeared to be the gang's leader. He had a deep scar across his cheek and a mean look in his dark eyes. Sadistic, but also intelligent. But what I noted was the crude tin crown he wore on his bald head, an unsubtle symbol of his power and position. The second man trailed behind the Rat King, and somehow his appearance was even more shocking. He was a short and ugly man with wild hair. But the real problem was what he carried on his back. A rucksack with appendages sticking out from the top. 2 severed human legs. "Well, my liege," the ferret-faced man sniveled. "We're going to have a feast tonight." "Oh no," the Rat King replied, his cruel smile widening as he looked down upon us. "This is Cass, Queen of the Amazons. We've been after her for a long time. Going to have some fun with this bitch before she dies." Then he turned to me. "And this asshole? He's from Bunker 1. Oh yes, I recognize the uniform. Many of my men have died trying to get past that damn barricade. But now we have leverage. A hostage." He snarled an order to his men. "Get them up on their feet and back to camp." The Rat King didn't get a chance to finish his sentence, because a second later, an arrow penetrated the skull of the man behind him. Suddenly, pandemonium broke out in the corridor as the Rat Pack piled out with weapons in hand. From our cell, I saw a second man fall with a javelin in his chest, and then the survivors broke and fled. "Let's go!" shouted one. "Grab the meat and run!" The Rat King cast us a hateful glare before retreating. A moment later, and our saviors arrived in the doorway. Our rescuers were a trio, and what interested me was how they wore uniforms that were a mixture of red and blue. 2 of the 3 were young warriors, a red-haired woman armed with a crossbow, and a man with olive skin who removed his spear from the chest of a dead cannibal. But their leader was an older man with gray hair, his brown eyes tired but still holding a spark of compassion. He smiled in recognition whilst holding out his hand to help Cass up to her feet. "Thanks for saving our asses, Joe," she said. "Not a problem," Joe replied. "Glad to help, but you were damn lucky we got here when we did." He frowned like a disapproving father. "What are you 2 doing out here, Cass?" "I was bringing him to see you guys," she answered whilst nodding towards me. "Calhoun kicked him out of the Beautiful Ones. Now he wants answers." "Is that so?" Joe said with a raised eyebrow as he looked me up and down. "Well, we best get moving. The Rat King's been given a bloody nose, but he'll return, looking for payback. We need to get underground. Then I'll tell this young man everything I know." I got up on my feet, relieved to still be alive and intrigued at what this new faction would reveal to me. We quickly escaped from the killing zone, fleeing before the Rat Pack cannibals returned. Joe and his people led the way while Cass and I followed, both of us grateful to still be in one piece. I expected to see yet more bland corridors and halls, but Joe's faction didn't bring us to another section of the hellish Bunker 2, because they didn't live in the bunker, they lived under it. Turning another corner, I was shocked to see a tunnel leading downwards. Panels had been removed from the bunker floor and a passageway had been dug into the earth. I hesitated for a second as Joe and his warriors descended into the hole, but Cass followed and I went with her. I don't know how they built the tunnel network which sprawled underneath the bunker complex, but clearly much work and planning had gone into its construction. The main tunnels were wide and tall enough for 2 fully grown adults to walk side by side. The support beams appeared sturdy and secure, and electric lights were mounted to the walls, wired up to a power source which I guessed was located inside the bunker above. Set beside the main tunnel were rooms and halls, some appearing substantial in size. Guards were posted at intersections, and I saw people, including whole families, living underground. Ironically, this lower level seemed safer and more peaceful when compared to the chaos and savagery in the bunker above. We eventually arrived at a central hall where Joe invited us to sit, while his people served us water in tin mugs. I looked around at the red and blue clad tunnel people, the dirt walls and electric lights. Honestly, I felt overwhelmed by this new environment, but then I saw a familiar creature scurrying across the floor, which brought me some comfort. It was Roland, my rodent companion who'd followed me all the way from Bunker 1. I smiled when I saw the rat approach, but was shocked by what happened next, as one of Joe's men rushed forward and brutally smashed Roland's tiny body with a heavy club. It was crazy, but I reacted with anger, jumping up and remonstrating with the club-wielding thug. "Why did you do that?" I screamed with fury. "He was an innocent creature." The man scoffed, but it was Joe who answered. "Look closer, Eddie." I did, observing what remained of the crushed rodent. I expected to see blood and guts, but instead saw wires and circuit boards. The discovery left me shocked and confused. "I don't understand," I mumbled. Joe and Cass walked up beside me, and neither appeared surprised. "It's not an animal. It's a machine, a remotely controlled surveillance unit sent by the topside controllers." "The controllers?" I repeated in bafflement. Joe and Cass shared a knowing look before the old man spoke. "You best sit down, Eddie. We've got a lot to talk about." I did as instructed, feeling like I was through the looking glass. Honestly, I was afraid of what I was about to hear, but also exhilarated because the truth was finally in sight. "You know Calhoun?" Joe asked. "Of course," I replied. "I was one of his favorites once upon a time, but then he cast me out." "Yes," Joe said thoughtfully. "Calhoun and I were close friends for many years. We were both part of the first generation. Not many of us left now, sadly." I raised my eyebrow in surprise. "You lived topside? Before the war?" "We did, but there was no war." My jaw dropped in disbelief. "No war? That doesn't make sense. Why else would you have gone below ground?" "We didn't come down here voluntarily," Joe said solemnly whilst lowering his head. "They put us here, trapped us in these bunkers and sealed off the doors. Why? Nobody knows for sure. Our best bet is some kind of experiment." He paused, pointing to the shattered remains of the robotic rodent. "We removed the surveillance cameras years ago, but they've become more sophisticated in keeping tabs on us. Our group moved underground in an attempt to escape their watchful eyes, not to mention the violence and chaos in Bunker 2. He sighed before continuing. "I suppose you could call our jailers benevolent. They provided ample food, water, and supplies to support a growing population. Much of the suffering inside the bunkers has been of our own doing. Take the Rat Pack as an example." My head was spinning and I felt like I could vomit. What Joe was saying sounded insane, and yet it all made sense to me. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. Calhoun? He's part of it then? He's running the experiment? Joe shook his head. No, Calhoun's a prisoner, just like the rest of us. The Beautiful Ones was his way of trying to take back control. His cult is built on a lie, as you can now see. To be fair to my old friend, he did what he thought necessary to keep order in his bunker. But in the end, the truth will always come out. I zoned out after this, unable to focus on Joe's words. Eventually, the old man left me be as I tried to process my thoughts. But Cass sat by my side, letting some compassion seep through her tough exterior as she put her arm around my shoulder, smiled, and spoke softly in my ear. You okay, Eddie? I opened my mouth, but couldn't find the words to respond. It didn't matter though, because a moment later, it all went to hell. Suddenly, a man ran into the underground hall, bleeding from what looked like a stab wound as he shouted frantically. It's the Rat Pack. They've broken through. Suddenly, every man and woman jumped into action, grabbing hold of weapons and preparing to defend their home turf. Cass and I joined their defensive line, and even the elderly Joe took up arms. We could hear the clash of steel weapons echoing through the tunnels, and the screams of men and women struck down. And then the enemy charged inside the hall. The Rat King and a dozen of his men, their spears and blades dripping with blood of their enemies. Their leader stood at the head of the mob, his crazed eyes full of bloodlust as he scanned the crowd, searching for targets. Meanwhile, the tunnelers joined the battle. Bolts and spears flew through the air. Men fell screaming, and the survivors fought hand to hand. I lost track of my companions during the melee. Cass was fighting a weasel-faced attacker and holding her own, but Joe was soon in trouble. The Rat King went straight for the tunneler's elderly leader, and poor Joe didn't stand a chance. I saw the old man fall with a knife through his heart. The hideous Rat King howled in triumph as Joe fell, the life draining from his tired old eyes. My heart was filled with fury in that moment as I charged forward, knife in hand. The Rat King was taken off guard. I don't think he was used to his victims fighting back. He saw me late and turned, slowly, but I hit him hard, burying my blade in his throat. Shock and pain filled the monster's eyes as blood sprayed from the open wound in his neck. He stumbled across the floor for a few seconds, until his blood loss was overwhelming, and then he collapsed into a heap in the dirt. The battle continued around me for several more seconds, but then the surviving Rat Pack members saw their leader was dead, and their morale broke. The boss is dead meat. Let's get the hell out. The surviving attackers fled, leaving their dead behind. Cass and I stood side by side, looking down at Joe's lifeless body. And in that moment, I realized that something had to change. Weeks passed before we made our move. The deaths of Joe and the Rat King had left a power vacuum in Bunker 2, one which Cass and I were able to take advantage of. It took time to reach out to all the factions and bring them under one flag, a difficult, nearly impossible task. But we managed it. Cass's Amazons, the tunnelers, the ferals, and even the surviving Rat Packers, former enemies, had become allies, and what brought them together was one thing: the truth. We spent time waiting for the right moment to strike. I wanted to avoid more bloodshed, if at all possible. Cass and I watched the barricade for several nights, waiting until both guards were asleep, before moving in quietly, overpowering and restraining both men and taking them prisoner. With this task completed, our ragtag army moved in. Calhoun had become complacent. It had been so long since the last significant attack upon Bunker 1, and their defenses were weak. His second mistake was letting me live. I'm sure Calhoun thought I'd die over there in Bunker 2. He certainly didn't expect me to come back with an army behind me. And I had an advantage that the Bunker 2 people didn't: knowledge. I'd grown up in Bunker 1, so I knew the layout, the people, and the routines. We came in while the beautiful ones were asleep, taking them off guard. By the time my former neighbors emerged from their bunks, it was already too late. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but I'd given my soldiers strict orders not to kill. The Bunker 1 community were in a state of shock and astonished to see me back. Sonia was amongst their number. There was anger in her eyes when she saw me, and I felt sure my ex-fiancé would speak out. But all Sonia's hatred seemed to melt away once she locked eyes with Cass. Because the two women were sisters, separated at a young age, but now reunited. And they weren't the only ones. The peoples of Bunker 1 and 2 had been enemies for years. But this was an artificial divide, and ultimately we were all from the same place. But Calhoun wasn't willing to accept this. The high priest marched into the dining hall where we'd assembled the prisoners. His enforcers, Mo and Duncan, stood by his side, and all three were armed with daggers. It seemed Calhoun wasn't ready to give up. He looked at me with disappointment in his old eyes, shaking his head as he spoke. "Edward, what have you done?" But this judgmental father routine wouldn't work on me. Not anymore. I didn't respond to Calhoun, instead speaking directly to the Bunker 1 folk. "This man has been lying to us for years. Yes, he may have had his reasons, but he's a liar nonetheless. There was no war. The surface isn't uninhabitable. The truth is, we're prisoners. Our forefathers were trapped down here decades ago. Anonymous controllers have been watching us ever since, observing us like we're rats in a damned maze. And this divide, Bunker 1 versus 2, it's meaningless. We are brethren, all from the same stock, and we're all victims of the same cruel system. Only by working together can we break the wheel." I'd been practicing the speech in my head for weeks, but honestly, I didn't know how it would be received. Would the beautiful ones continue to deny reality? Would they remain loyal to Calhoun and his false vision? I looked around the faces of the people I'd grown up with and saw the doubt creeping in. It seemed there had been cracks for some time, and now it was all crumbling down. I expected Calhoun to call me the liar and defend what he'd spent his entire life building. The old man opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He looked exhausted and defeated, and perhaps even relieved that it was all over. The final blow was when Duncan and Mo, his most loyal enforcers, dropped their weapons and came over to our side. I had won, but I didn't hate the fallen high priest. I felt sorry for him. "You can still join us, Calhoun," I exclaimed in an attempt at reconciliation. "You're a victim of the system too. Help us find a way out." Calhoun laughed bitterly, waving his knife in the air as he spoke. "You stupid boy," he exclaimed. "You still don't get it, do you? There is no way out. You have no idea what you're unleashing. It's over, Calhoun. This is happening, whether you like it or not." I honestly didn't anticipate what Calhoun would do. If I had any inkling, I would have tried to stop him, but he acted too quickly. Such was the former high priest's determination. "I won't be a part of this," he cried out in defiance. Then Calhoun raised the knife to his neck, and he sliced his throat from ear to ear. Cass, Sonia, and I ran to his side, but it was already too late. Calhoun choked on his own blood, and the life went out of his eyes. I hadn't wanted anyone to die, but Calhoun made his own choice. His action wouldn't stop us. We all marched as one now. Beautiful ones, Amazons, tunnelers, and Rat Pack, all united with a common goal to break the system and escape from this man-made hell. There was only one place to go. The bulkhead doors, the steel barrier separating us from the surface. We didn't know how to break out. Not yet. But together, we would work it out. We marched as one down the final corridor, our goal in sight. But the controllers must have anticipated this scenario, I saw one, then two, then three rats emerging from the vents in the walls and ceiling. Except, they weren't rats. They were the same model as Roland, surveillance drones. But this wasn't their only purpose. Within moments, there were dozens, and then hundreds. They emerged from every crevice, coming in front and behind, soon surrounding our party. The mechanical killers surged forward in a deadly wave, opening their maws to reveal rows of razor-sharp steel teeth. One of our number fell, bit on the ankles and shins before being overwhelmed by a swarm of ruthless attackers who tore him apart. People screamed and tried to flee in a blind panic, knocking others down and crushing them in a stampede. Meanwhile, the rats kept on coming, tearing into human flesh. Many of our people fought back, smashing and slicing robotic rats with clubs and machetes. But there were so many of them. Soon, it descended into a bloodbath as Calhoun's grim warnings came to fruition. Cass, Sonia, and I formed a defensive ring, protecting the children as we prepared to fight a desperate last stand. Our plan was a disaster, as the system had fought back with unprecedented brutality. And yet, as I faced a likely death, I felt surprisingly calm. Because, although we might die today, at least we would die free. No longer prisoners, dwelling in the darkness